Welcome to the fantasy audiobook, Hokage. I managed to survive until I became the boss of Sannin. Chapter 41. The Kingdom of Water is a country composed of a huge island as its main body and dozens of small islands surrounding it. Precisely because of its special geographical location, the country suffered the least damage during the Warring States period and the First Ninja War. But the unique environment undoubtedly limits the country's resources and development. Therefore, after the establishment of the Water Kingdom, the top management of the Water Kingdom had a stronger obsession with enhancing the strength of the village than the other four countries. Especially since the tailed beast was obtained from Jeonju at a high price, the country's top officials have been committed to finding the possibility of Jinchuriki. Even in the development of the original plot, they even did not hesitate to let the original fourth Mizukage, the actual third Mizukage Godachibana Yagura, become the Jinchuriki of Three Tails, as a force eager to make its voice heard in the country. In this Three Kingdoms joint Chunin examination, Kurigakure village volunteered to be the exam venue. Of course, in order to avoid danger and unnecessary conflicts in the village, the actual venue was arranged on a nearby island. Considering that the candidates this time are all from faraway countries, a full week was given for this gathering. Today is the last day of gathering. Anashima, this is the island selected for the Chunin exam this time. Unlike the technologically advanced Blue Star, every island in this world maintains its original appearance. Anashima is no exception. Except for the only pier entering the island, there are only a few buildings standing on the plain near the shore. In addition, there are endless woods as far as the eye can see. But today, a rare number of people appeared on this small island that is usually rarely visited. It is the genin from various countries gathered here to take the exam. These candidates were gathered in front of a white building. What was different from what these candidates expected was that they waited from morning to noon, and no examiner or staff showed up. Not knowing why, they could only wait in silence. Just as time went by, these candidates gradually began to gather into different groups. If you look down from mid-air, you can see that the crowd is vaguely divided into three groups. These three groups happen to correspond to the forces of Konoha Village, Kurigakure Village, and Cloud Hidden Village. After all, the war has only stopped for a few years. Even in this so-called peaceful era, the fight between countries has never stopped. Under this premise, it is normal for candidates from various countries to gather together spontaneously. However, as time passed by, the examiner they were expecting still did not appear. But the atmosphere at the scene slowly began to change for the worse. Most of the people present here are descendants of families who have been working as ninjas for generations. For most of the people inside, their parents or relatives were more or less killed on the battlefield of the First Ninja War. And this hatred of the death of relatives will naturally be inherited by these descendants. In the absence of examiners, there was a hint of anger in the eyes of these candidates. In the First Ninja War, these three countries naturally fought against each other. Even after the armistice, many of their relatives were killed by ninjas from the other two countries during the execution of their missions. So it can be said that the genin candidates in these three countries basically hate each other. At this time, there was no need for others to instigate the situation, and the tense atmosphere in the field had already formed without even realizing it. Sure enough, not long after, a burst of noise appeared along with the commotion in the crowd. I saw a young man wearing a forehead protector with the Konoha symbol falling to the ground. He looked angrily at the group of people with sneering faces in front of him. These people are both men and women, but they all wear forehead protectors with the logo of Kurigakure Village on their heads. Although he was alone, the boy from Konoha had no intention of backing down. He angrily roared at the people in front of him. "What do you mean? Why did you push me down on purpose?" Since the examiner had not yet appeared, he could not hold back his impatience and came to the only building on site. Looking at the closed door in front of him, he began to observe carefully, hoping to find some clues. But just as he was concentrating on inspecting the white building in front of him, he felt someone push him hard behind him. In this unexpected collision, he was pushed to the ground without paying attention. Faced with the question from the young man from Konoha in front of them, this group of people did not answer. The first of them, a young man who was close to him in age and wearing a rain hat common in the Kingdom of Water, took a step forward. He looked at Konoha genin on the ground with contempt, raised the corners of his mouth, and said in a frivolous tone. "Oops, sorry. Maybe you were too thin and we didn't see anyone in front of us and accidentally bumped into you." Quote. After saying that, he looked at the other party jokingly, shook his head slowly, clicked his tongue twice, and then said again. "But has Konoha fallen to this level now? Are you qualified to take the Chunin exam if a character like you who is prone to collapse at the slightest touch is qualified?" As soon as he finished speaking, the people behind him seemed to have heard something funny. He started laughing in response. Faced with such humiliation, the Konoha boy immediately stood up from the ground. His face showed a blush rising from anger. He stared at the group of people with wide eyes, and said through gritted teeth. "You are not allowed to insult the name of Konoha. It's not your turn to judge whether I am qualified or not. Or do you want to fight me to see who is more qualified?" Facing the Konoha boy's provocation, the smile on the Yuli boy's face did not change. He took a step forward, raised the rain hat above his head with his right hand slightly, and scanned the person in front of him. Perhaps he had long-standing grudges against the ninjas of Konoha. After a few seconds, he just heard him sneer and say, "No, you may have heard wrong. I didn't mean to insult Konoha. But, in my opinion, none of the generation present in Konoha is qualified to take the exam." Quote. Facing this map cannon, the other Konoha genin who had been watching on the sidelines finally couldn't help it anymore. They moved slowly and vaguely surrounded Yuli's group of people. Of course, other people in Kurigakure village also started moving at the same time. They also walked behind the Yuli boy and confronted everyone in Konoha. Of course, not all people from Kurigakure village came over. Not far away, there were 7 Kurigakure genin holding various forms of ninja swords. The conflict here didn't seem to attract their attention, and the 7 of them were still sitting there leisurely. Either he closes his eyes and rests, or he looks up at the sky, or he stares at the house in his hand in a daze. Anyway, they didn't even pay attention to what was happening in the field. Facing the actions of these 7 people, a hint of gloom flashed in the eyes of the Yuli boy. Of course he knew that these 7 were the special people who were given the 7 ninja swordsmen by Lord Mizukage. In this Chunin exam, they are the real trump cards of Kurigakure village. And those who also didn't move were the people from Union village. Unlike the other 2 countries, which were slightly scattered, the genin in Union village all consciously stood behind a young man with an eye patch on his left eye. This boy was Toshiro, who was given high hopes by the 3rd Hokage. He has a poise that belies his age. Looking at the conflict in front of him, he motioned to everyone behind him to keep quiet. Not participating, not even watching, just watching the development of the situation with cold eyes. Although he did not get the support of the 7 ninja swordsmen, he looked at the many companions behind him. The Yuli boy felt that the situation was in his hands. Seeing that the fight was about to break out, the boy in Yuli moved his lips slightly, as if he was about to continue to say something. A slightly frivolous voice suddenly sounded in the field. "Sorry, we just arrived and didn't hear clearly. What did you say about Konoha just now? Do you want to say it again? Do you want to say it again?" As that voice sounded, everyone looked toward the center of the field. I saw a handsome young man with black hair, black eyes, wearing a purple vest and a Jonin combat uniform slowly appeared in front of everyone. Behind him were 3 companions wearing the same clothes but with different colors of vests. It was Kagura, Tsunade, Orochimaru, Jiraiya and others who had just arrived. In fact, the reason why Kagura and others arrived so late was not because they were trying to be cool. Kagura sneered at the idea that the protagonist should appear last. But after hearing that the meeting time was 7 days away, as a miser, he couldn't hold it back. On the way to the Kingdom of Water, I received another mission. However, the time to complete this sea-level task far exceeded their expectations. So after completing the task, they immediately started heading towards the venue. I rushed slowly and hurriedly along the way, and finally arrived at my destination on the last day. However, as soon as they arrived at the outskirts of the venue, they heard the provocative words from the Yuli boy. Seeing the unhappy look in Tsunade's eyes next to her, Kagura immediately said those words with a wink. With the appearance of Kagura and others, the expressions of everyone present showed different changes. The first is everyone in Konoha. Naturally, they knew the seniors like Kagura. Regarding this legendary Team 7, even Lord Hokage personally acknowledged their strength. If it weren't for Kagura, the captain, who was obsessed with making money, he would have missed the Chunin exams the first 2 times because of completing tasks. They will not be reduced to taking exams with their own class. So the moment they saw Kagura and others, a look of relief appeared on the faces of other Konoha genin. Even the angry look on the face of the young Konoha boy who was involved had faded away. Instead, there was a look of peace. The crowd that had originally vaguely surrounded the Yuli boy slowly backed away and took the initiative to make way for them. They have absolute confidence in Kagura and others. The large number of people in Kurigakure village in front of them seemed unable to pose any threat to them. Not far away, the 7 ninja swordsmen, who were doing their own things, all turned their eyes over the moment Kagura appeared. Under Lord Mizukage's special instructions, they naturally conducted a detailed investigation on this competitor from Konoha. However, with the investigation during this period, the more I got to know this person, the more I felt frightened by his strength. At the moment when they really faced Kagura, the intuition from the ninja told them that the strength of the person in front of them might be stronger than what they investigated. On the other side of Union Village, Toshiro also looked at Kagura's figure with a solemn expression. As the only genius of this generation in Union Village, he has always been a steady person. Although his strength far exceeds that of his peers, he never underestimates any opponent. But the appearance of Kagura still made him, who had always been steady, feel tremendous pressure. There is no mistake, he is the one who passed the ball. Monster. As for the gathering in Kurigakure, bursts of discussion came out. Apparently they had also heard of Kagura's name as a monster, and they naturally knew that this monster would participate in the same exam as them. Then through the handsome face with black hair and black eyes, and the obvious clothes. Although no one present took the initiative to say Kagura's name, many people among the genin in Kurigakure village recognized him. As Kagura and others slowly approached step by step, a drop of cold sweat appeared on the face of the boy named Yuli. Although Kagura didn't do anything specifically, she remembered all his deeds. As that ordinary figure gradually approached, in his eyes it seemed like a giant shadow weighing on his heart. Kagura and others stopped a few meters away from him. Kagura picked her ears with her right little finger and looked up at the people in Kurigakure village. His gaze seemed to have an inexplicable weight. As he raised his head, everyone in the Hidden Mist village took a step back. The Yuli boy, who also took a step back, seemed to be angered by his cowardly behavior. He gritted his teeth and took another step forward, forcing himself to look directly into Kagura's eyes and said, What do you want?" Kagura took the little finger of her right hand out of her ear and blew the earwax off slightly. He looked at the person in front of him like a fool and replied, "I said, are you deaf? Didn't Lousy just say it? I want you to say it again." Quote. Upon hearing Kagura's request, the Yuli boy's face suddenly turned pale. But in fact, this is not really Kagura playing tricks on him, Kagura is telling the truth. They had just arrived at the scene. He had a Sharingan, but not a Sharingan. How could he possibly hear the live conversation just now from such a distance? Vaguely he just heard the word Konoha, looked over from a distance and saw the positions of the people wearing Konoha forehead protectors and the people from Kurigakure village. No need to ask more, he roughly guessed what happened, so he spoke up to interrupt the confrontation. However, when faced with Kagura's question, the boy Yuli only regarded it as a provocation to him. But facing this legendary monster, he found that he didn't have the courage to repeat what he just said. His face turned green and white, either because he was angry at his own weakness, or because of his hatred for Konoha. He suddenly broke out. His eyes turned blood red and he suddenly pulled out a short sword from behind. He roared angrily, "I'll fight you." Before he finished speaking, he had already rushed towards Kagura. Facing this sudden attack, Kagura did not react at all. In the bloodthirsty smile of the Yuli boy, the blade in his hand slashed hard at Kagura's head. However, facing this blow, not only Kagura, but also the 3 Tsunade people behind him seemed unable to see it. Still standing calmly, just when the blade was only a few centimeters away from Kagura's head, the short blade that seemed to be moving forward suddenly stopped. The Yuli boy seemed to have seen something terrifying, with a look of horror on his face. But his body seemed to have been tapped, and he remained motionless in a slashing posture. Looking at the eyes of the Yuli boy in front of him that were constantly turning and filled with fear. Kagura, whose eyes had turned to Sharingan at some point, said dissatisfiedly. I asked you, are the ninjas in Kurigakure village sick? Lousy just asked a question. If you don't want to answer, why don't you just answer? How dare you come out and chop me with a knife even if you disagree with me? The Yuli boy in front of him could obviously hear his words. His eyes kept turning around, and a lot of cold sweat broke out on his forehead. But no matter how hard he tried, he still couldn't control his body. He just felt like his body didn't belong to him. Even if he tried his best, he couldn't move a finger. At this moment, a figure flashed, and one of the 7 ninja swordsmen flashed in front of Kagura. This person has short black hair, no eyebrows, sharp teeth, and a large cross scar on the right side of his face. The ears and neck were wrapped in bandages. The lower face is painted with red streaks. Behind his back was a huge beheading knife that was unequal to his height. It was the first user of the broken sword, the beheading sword, Juzang Loquat. His figure appeared between Kagura and Ukasa boy. He tilted his head to avoid eye contact with Kagura. Obviously he knew that Kagura had genjutsu that he could use through Sharingan, so he did this on purpose. Loquat Juzang said, I apologize to you for the useless behavior of Kurigakure. But this is the land of water after all, and he belongs to our village no matter what. If we really want to punish him, it should be us. Quote. After saying that, without waiting for Kagura's response, he suddenly kicked the Yuli boy who couldn't move away hard. The young man's figure flew dozens of meters away, hit a tree trunk, and fell to the ground. After doing all this, he spoke again. I wonder if this can express our sincerity. Seeing Loquat Juzo's behavior in front of him, Kagura gave him a meaningful look. Aware of his gaze, Loquat Juzo tilted his head even further. After thinking deeply for a few seconds, Kagura chuckled lightly, turned around and walked towards the white building without saying anything. And with his chuckle, the Yuli boy who had been kicked to the ground finally let out a cry of pain. He held his kicked stomach with both hands, curled up into a ball, and spit out a mouthful of blood on the ground. However, everyone did not pay attention to him at this time, but looked in the direction of Kagura. Walking to the closed door of the white building, Kagura stopped. He tilted his head and glanced at the door, then turned to look at the people behind him in confusion and said, I said, what are you all doing? Didn't you see anyone there? The 2 examiners are standing here, why don't you go in? Don't you see the 2 examiners standing here? As Kagura's words spread, the expressions of everyone present changed. The place suddenly returned to silence, and even the Yuli boy stopped coughing and looked at Kagura in disbelief. What's the meaning? The examiner is already standing at the scene. After everyone understood the meaning of this sentence, they couldn't help but look at each other, and a mysterious atmosphere arose in everyone's hearts. Seeing everyone's expressions, Kagura also understood that they didn't seem to fully understand what he meant. He slowly walked towards the white building, but the direction he was traveling was not the closed door. Instead, he walked towards a white wall next to the door. Stopping in front of the wall, Kagura raised his right hand and stretched forward in front of everyone's surprised eyes. When he touched the surface of the wall, it seemed to cause a ripple, and then his hand sank into the wall. Kagura didn't care about this situation, or it could be said that all this was within his expectation. He then took steps, passed through the wall, and disappeared in front of everyone. Tsunade and the others behind him didn't say much, and followed his footsteps into the wall. The remaining people looked at each other again, not knowing what to do for a moment. In the end, it was the Konoha boy who had just gotten into a dispute who made the first move. He stared closely at the wall where Kagura and others disappeared, and walked up without hesitation. After seeing the figure of the Konoha boy disappearing under the wall, everyone finally woke up. They were no longer suspicious and followed into the wall one by one. Kumogakure village behind Toshiro Genin looked at him with questioning eyes. After seeing Toshiro nodding slightly, everyone stopped staying and followed the crowd and walked forward. Toshiro did not start immediately, but walked slowly to the back of the team. Like him were the 7 ninja swordsmen, who were also standing on the same spot. Just when Toshiro passed by these 7 people, he chuckled inexplicably. He seemed to be facing the 7 people, and seemed to be talking to himself. The name, monster, certainly lives up to its name. However, I believe that some of the people present have seen through this illusion. Quote. After hearing his probing words, the 7 people still remained silent and did not respond to him. Toshiro didn't pay attention and kept walking forward slowly at his own pace. As the last person entered, everyone finally gathered in the building. This is a large white auditorium, and at the front of the crowd are the 4 Kagura people who entered first. The 4 of them formed a small group and stood under the high platform of the auditorium. The others spontaneously gathered into 3 groups after entering. Only the 7 ninja swordsmen, who entered last, stood far away at the end, as self-contained as Kagura and others. At the top of the auditorium, stood 2 examiners. The 2 wore forehead protectors with the symbols of Konoha and Kurigakure on their heads and right arms respectively. The one wearing the forehead protector was a jonin from Konoha. He has short brown hair and an ordinary appearance, except for a shallow scar on the right side of his face. As for Kurigakure jonin, who wears a forehead protector on his right arm, he has a shining bald head and a sinister face as he scans the audience with fierce eyes. Seeing that no one was entering from behind, he coughed lightly. This slight cough seemed to be a signal, and the originally noisy scene instantly became quiet. The bald jonin raised his head and looked around, and finally his eyes rested on Kagura at the front. He said in a deep voice, "Did you discover the illusion I arranged outside?" Facing the other party's aggressive gaze, Kagura nodded indifferently. He paused slightly, looked at Kagura's pair of Sharingan, and murmured in a low voice. "As this Sharingan, it is indeed worthy of the title of Genjutsu's most powerful pupil technique, just one glance." After speaking, he shook his head slightly and looked up at the people behind him. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, and his low and hoarse voice sounded again. "The Genjutsu in front of the door is your first test. Those who break through that illusion and come to us to report will pass the first test. If you fail to come to us before 2 p.m., we can only ask you to go back." Quote. Hearing this sentence, the bottom made a buzzing sound again. If Kagura hadn't directly broken through the illusion, they might still be waiting outside the wall. The bald examiner raised his right hand, signaled everyone to keep quiet, and announced, "Okay, although it is not the same as our original intention, but since you are all here, the first level is for everyone to pass." Having said this, he turned his head and looked at the other examiner beside him. After seeing the jonin from Konoha nod slightly, he continued, "Next, we will directly start the second assessment. Everyone, follow me here." Quote. After saying that, the 2 examiners turned around and walked towards a part of the auditorium. Many candidates followed behind silently. After passing through a not-so-long corridor, everyone came to a room that resembled a classroom. The 2 examiners stood in the classroom one behind the other. After a brief pause, everyone consciously sat down on one of the seats. The bald examiner standing at the top crossed his arms. After seeing all the candidates seated, he took out a test paper from behind and placed it on the podium in front of him. When she saw the test paper, Kagura started complaining crazily in her heart. "Really, there is still a written test?" I asked. "Can the education bureaus of this world have some new ideas? What kind of written test do you want a group of ninjas to do? It seems that there are no cultural classes taught in the ninja school." Looking at the candidates in the audience who seemed to have guessed the content of the assessment and some of their eyes were straight, the corners of the bald examiner's mouth raised slightly. After looking around for a week, he said, "As you may have guessed, the assessment content this time is a written test. What I have in my hand is the test paper for this written test." Quote. After saying that, he took out another stack of test papers from under the podium, walked to the front desk and started distributing them. For a while, there was only the sound of paper turning, and a white wave surged from the front to the back. It was the candidates in front who consciously passed the test papers to those behind. After the bald examiner distributed the test papers, he returned to the top podium again. He began to describe the rules of the exam. "There is a pen under the desk where you are sitting. The time for answering questions is 1 hour. The full score of the exam paper is 100 points. If you can reach 80 points, you will pass the exam." Quote. At this time, Kagura was listening to his story while curiously looking at the test paper in her hand. But when he saw the questions on the test paper clearly, he couldn't help but be shocked. This is. Looking at the test content on the test paper, Kagura's eyes were in a trance. This is the first question on the test paper. The following are the known conditions. You have been seriously injured and cannot move, and you only have a shuriken with an explosive charm in your hand. The enemy is about 100 meters away from you and is searching for you, and you also know the specific location of the enemy at this time. There is a big tree with a branch width of 10 meters and a height of 50 meters right between you and the enemy. The effective damage range of the explosive charm is 1 meter in radius. Please tell me, what angle should you use to project the object from the ground, and how long should you set the explosion time of the explosive symbol? Only then can I use shuriken to cause effective damage to the enemy. The moment he saw this question, Kagura felt as if he had traveled back to Blue Star and was taking the familiar physics test paper. He quickly looked at the other questions and found that these questions were basically elementary physics problems. Of course, there is also some common sense involving the structure of the human body. For example, what hits a specific part of the body can cause a person to lose the ability to walk? Which part of the human body can be hit to instantly render the enemy unconscious, and give 3 specific ways to do so? I have to say that this is indeed a test paper with strong practical operations in the Hokage world. Basically, some battle scenarios or some common sense issues in fighting are listed. But the problem is that this type of question is not difficult at all for Kagura, a person who has experienced traditional Chinese education in her previous life. Except for the part about human body structure, these other topics in Blue Star can only be regarded as junior high school level knowledge at best. Kagura became more and more excited as she looked at the test questions that were giving her nothing. Not noticing Kagura's excited expression, the bald examiner on the podium continued to explain the examination rules. He picked up the first test paper and showed it in front of everyone. The test paper was densely filled with answers. Before everyone in the audience could take a closer look, he put the test paper with the answers back on the desk and said, "This is a test paper with the correct answers. All submitted test papers will be assessed and scored on the spot. Next, I will tell you the elimination rules for the assessment, please listen carefully." After a slight pause, he continued, "Those whose test scores are less than 80 points will be eliminated." 2 of our examiners caught him peeking at the test paper in my hand, and he was eliminated. Anyone who peeks at other candidates' answers and is discovered by us will be eliminated. If we discover the answers to private exchanges between each other, we will eliminate them. After hearing these rules, the candidates present immediately understood why there were 2 examiners arranged for this assessment, and they would stand one behind the other after entering the classroom. But they also heard some meanings of these rules. You can answer the questions yourself, and you will pass if you can score 80 points. If not, there is also a reference answer above. As long as you can use ninjutsu to peek without being discovered, it's not a violation. Looking at the understanding expressions of many candidates in the audience, the bald examiner still had that serious expression. He looked up at the clock hanging behind him and finally announced, "The exam lasts 1 hour, start now." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a slight swishing sound of the pen scratching the paper. Kagura, who was familiar with the plot, understood the true purpose of this exam without having to understand the examiner's words. This assessment was completely free for him. In fact, with his current strength, it is not difficult to directly control everyone present with genjutsu, and then walk up to see the correct answer slowly. It's just that these test questions are too simple for him, and there is no need to waste his chakra. In the same way, this kind of test paper is basically not difficult for Tsunade and Orochimaru. There is no way, in these years of team formation, since Class 7 did not have a teacher to lead the team, Kagura naturally became the role of teaching the 3 of them. As for Kagura, who has memories of living in Blue Star, he always likes to use physics to teach some physical skills or throwing skills during the teaching process. Although teaching this knowledge in a world that seems to violate physics is a bit idiotic, Tsunade and Orochimaru, who are already smart, actually made a lot of progress from this kind of teaching. Thanks to Kagura's knowledge infusion, the questions in this test paper were free for those 2 people. Not to mention Tsunade, who was already learning healing techniques, was delighted when she saw the knowledge about the structure of the human body. There is definitely a but that cannot be separated here. However, there are always some exceptions to everything. The exception is Jiraiya. Maybe he really has no talent, or maybe he is not interested in these methods. Compared to the physics taught by Kagura, he prefers to believe in his own feelings. Over the years, Jiraiya has read many books out of interest. But those books are basically novels or historical books. Of course, it's hard to find books on subjects other than ninjutsu in this world. The current exam, in Kagura's words from his previous life, is like a pure liberal arts student who took the wrong science exam. Thinking of this, Kagura raised his head and looked at the people beside him. As he expected, Tsunade and Orochimaru had already picked up their pens and started writing. Only Jiraiya still kept holding the test paper in both hands, staring straight ahead, not knowing what he was thinking. At this time, Jiraiya was staring at the test questions in front of him, feeling his scalp numb. Well, he vaguely remembered that it seemed that the knowledge Kagura had told them on weekdays had parts that were consistent with many of the above questions. But he has never listened carefully. As a ninja, how to throw darts doesn't matter if you have hands. Putting down the test paper in his hand, he looked blankly at Tsunade and Orochimaru who were writing furiously beside him. At this moment, just like the handsome guys and beauties who were reading the book, he began to regret why he didn't remember the knowledge well. However, this confusion only lasted a few minutes. Jiraiya, who was in a daze, seemed to have thought of something, and his expression suddenly became confident. He suddenly stood up, without caring about the candidates around him, and quickly formed his hand seals. I saw him slap the table decisively, and a column of smoke rose up. As the smoke cleared, a toad with glasses appeared on his desk. The toad was no more than the size of a small dog. It raised its glasses from the side with its right palm and asked in a calm tone. "Oh, rare, little Jiraiya, you actually summoned me. Tell me, what's the matter?" Looking at the toad in front of him, Jiraiya raised his hand to touch the back of his head in embarrassment, pushed the test paper in his hand over, and said embarrassedly, "Can you help me with this test paper?" The spectacled toad in front of him was the most knowledgeable among the Mount Myoboku that Jiraiya knew. In desperation, he had no choice but to make this decision. I don't know why, it was obviously just a toad, but everyone clearly saw a look of contempt on the toad's face. It rolled its eyes at Jiraiya, but still took the test paper and started reading it. But a few seconds later, it grabbed the pen from Jiraiya's hand. He held the pen in a weird posture with the webbed palm and started to write the answer while complaining. "Can you solve such a simple question by yourself next time? I tell you to read more useful books. Also, if you dare to secretly put those pornographic books in my place next time, I will file a complaint with the great Toad Immortal." Jiraiya froze when he heard that the spectacled toad revealed all his little secrets, but could only rely on it to take the test. Putting his hands on the table awkwardly, he could only lower his head silently in the end. Tsunade on the side raised her head and cast a contemptuous look at him, then lowered her head to the test paper and started writing. Jiraiya's godlike operation shocked all the candidates. One of the candidates from Union Village looked at the toad speechlessly, and then looked at the bald examiner on the stage. He hesitated and asked, "I said, is this okay?" The bald examiner, who kept his arms folded, didn't even look at him, but still answered his question. "Didn't the rules I just mentioned say that you can't use necromancy?" Operator Operator Ah. Okay, it seems like there really isn't. That's fine then. If you have the ability, you can also channel a summoned beast to help you take the exam. I won't stop it either. Quote, after hearing the bald examiner's answer, the candidate lowered his head helplessly and started writing silently. Hateful. Who would form a contract with a scholar-type psychic beast? Although Jiraiya's actions caused some commotion, the scene quickly calmed down. Although there are many people present who have learned psychic skills and have their own psychic beasts. But just as the candidate thought, when choosing psychic beasts, everyone tries to find powerful ones. If you really can't take a step back, you should at least look for types with special functions. The idea that knowledge is power is obviously not feasible in this world. So if he wanted to imitate Jiraiya and channel someone to take the exam instead of him, he would be the only special case. Talking about spiritualism, this is still a pain in Kagura's heart. The reason was that no matter how hard he tried to channel, the white egg still appeared every time. It was as if a ghost had taken possession of him, the egg seemed to have taken a liking to him, and he couldn't feel other creatures at all every time he used necromancy. Later, after 3rd Hokage Sarutobi Hiruzen learned about this, he also gave him his own advice. Kagura listened to the suggestion, and after careful consideration, she signed a contract with the egg with her blood. The moment the contract came into effect, Kagura truly felt the powerful creature inside the egg. However, several years have passed, and every time he is summoned, the appearance of the egg remains almost unchanged. Even Kagura at some point was imagining the possibility of throwing eggs at her enemies in the future. Returning to the examination site, after the commotion caused by Jiraiya, the scene returned to the sound of paper and pen rubbing against each other. However, after a while, the Konoha Jonin who had been standing behind and seemed to have no trace of his presence appeared. Suddenly, his figure appeared next to a certain candidate and held the person's right hand tightly. The examinee who was caught turned pale instantly, and there was a note on the palm of his right hand. Konoha Jonin bent down and gently picked up the note with the index finger and thumb of his other hand. Opening it slowly, the above are the answers to the first 2 questions in the exam. He looked at him and the candidates beside him expressionlessly and said, "You 2 were caught cheating, were disqualified from the exam, and were eliminated." After saying that, without waiting for their explanation, he directly carried them out one by one like a puppy. Not long after the Konoha Jonin left, the bald examiner on the stage also made a move. He was originally standing on the stage with his arms folded across his chest and suddenly stepped down hard with his foot. With a loud noise, a big hole was made in the floor beneath his feet. There was an examinee in the pit who was sitting on the ground with a horrified look on his face, looking desperately at the examiner in front of him. Looking at the candidates in the pit, the bald examiner showed a sinister smile and said, "It's pretty good to know how to use Earth Style. But you idiot, can you put a clone on your seat before using Earth Style? Or do you think I'm blind and can't even see that there's one less person on the field? You failed too. Here I declare that you are eliminated, get out of here." After these 2 episodes, the atmosphere at the scene obviously became tense. They also understood at this time that if they wanted to cheat in front of these 2 Jonin, they would have to use some real skills. However, even so, it happens from time to time that a certain candidate is caught on the spot. As for Kagura, it only took 15 minutes to complete the test paper in front of her. Then he leaned back leisurely on the chair, his eyes slowly turned to Sharingan, and he watched with interest the cheating methods of those present. In fact, in addition to those who were caught on the spot with poor means, there are still many people who have successfully cheated. For example, Toshiro from Union Village. In fact, his method is similar to that of the candidate who was picked up from the ground and used Earth Style. It's just that his body didn't move, but just sat there. He secretly released an Earth clone under his seat, and directed the clone to use Earth Style to reach the ceiling some distance away from the bald examiner. So the clone only exposed its only intact eye, taking in all the correct answers spread out on the podium. Another example is the 7 ninja swordsmen. Their targets are obviously candidates who are easier to attack. A layer of mist suddenly appeared where they were at a certain moment, but that layer of mist only existed for a second and then disappeared. However, in just this second, 2 of the 7 people were replaced by water avatars. The 2 people themselves teleported and turned into darkness, hiding in the shadow of the target candidates. So the 2 people hid in the shadows and read all the answers of the target openly. Then he used the same method to return to his original position, and instantly removed the water body and replaced it. The 7 people seemed to have their own code system. After completing the problem solving, the 2 people moved their hands secretly and made several gestures. The other 5 people suddenly seemed to know the answer and began to write. In addition, Kagura also discovered that there were many ninjas with other methods on the scene, and their diverse methods opened Kagura's eyes. There is Genin from Konoha's Yamanaka clan, who directly uses the technique of mind-body transformation to check the answers of other candidates. There were also people from the Aburame clan who spread a lot of bugs in the examination room. However, what surprised Kagura the most was a candidate from Union Village. He didn't know what method to use, but he actually created a cloud that was only the size of a palm above the examination room. And he actually transferred one of his eyes to the cloud. The thin cloud just floated slowly above the examination room, checking the test papers of most of the candidates. As each candidate showed their magical powers, time passed by minute by second. As the time approached, many candidates in the venue also showed different expressions. The candidates who had completed the examination papers sat quietly in their seats, waiting for the passage of time with a calm expression. Those who did not know how to do the questions and did not dare to cheat because of the intimidation in front of them seemed restless. No matter what, time continues to pass at its own pace. An hour passed quickly. The bald examiner at the top looked up at the clock and announced the end of the exam. This time it also violated the plot in Kagura's image. The examiner did not do anything in the so-called final assessment. It did not test everyone's determination, saying that if they failed, they would be unable to take the exam for life. Chunin came to force back those who were wavering. After announcing the end of the exam, the two examiners collected all the exam papers as usual, and then sat at the scene to correct them on the spot. However, the essence of this assessment is to test the candidate's ability to obtain information. Of course, if you have sufficient knowledge yourself, you can avoid this ability test. In fact, there are not many questions in these examination papers. Most of them are in the form of large questions. Basically, there are only about 10 questions in the entire examination paper. But even so, facing nearly 100 test papers, it took the two examiners nearly an hour to finish marking them all. Those candidates who scored less than 80 points were asked out of the classroom and looked at the remaining 70 or 80 candidates. The bald examiner stood on the podium and congratulated expressionlessly. Congratulations on passing the second assessment. Here, from a personal standpoint, I would like to remind you that the next assessment will no longer be so peaceful. You will face casualties and even death. If there are any candidates who are afraid, I suggest that there is still a chance to withdraw. Quote. Pausing slightly, he looked at the many genin below. How can someone who can sign up for the Chunin exam give up easily just because of these two sentences? After waiting for a few minutes, when no one left, the bald examiner sighed with relief and regret. He then spoke. Okay, now that you have made your choice, then follow me to the next exam location. After speaking, he led everyone out of the white building. After passing through a forest, they saw a larger forest. After everyone gathered on the flat ground in front of the forest, the bald examiner turned around and began to explain the content of the next exam to them. After hearing the specific content, Kagura's eyes couldn't help but shrink. It seems that the cruelty of this exam has just begun. It was already afternoon, and it was the time of day when the sun was at its strongest. However, the huge forest not far from Kagura and the others looked like a giant beast lying on the ground. The layers of trees obscured everyone's view, and even the scorching sun's rays could not penetrate. The darkness in the depths of the forest was like the eyes of a giant beast, watching the people in front of it. Everyone gathered in an open space in front of the forest, and the bald examiner who led the team stood at the front of many candidates. In the previous written examination, they eliminated nearly a quarter of the candidates because they did not score enough or were caught cheating. However, even so, there were still nearly 70 or 80 people standing at the scene. That Konoha Jonin disappeared silently after the written examination. At this time, there was only this bald examiner in front of Kagura and the others. He looked around, looking at the excited eyes of the people in front of him who were eager to try, and a rare hint of unbearability flashed in his heart. After clearing his throat, he spoke. Next, is the third assessment. You should also have noticed the forest in front of you. Quote. As he spoke, he raised his right hand and pointed to the forest behind him with his thumb. Without waiting for anyone to respond, he continued. On the other side of that forest, there is a white building. Your task for this assessment is to arrive at the building before 12 noon tomorrow. But in addition, there is a condition required. Quote. Having said this, the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, and he glanced at everyone with a malicious look before saying. After arriving there, only those with 2 forehead protectors are qualified to enter and truly complete this assessment. After hearing his words, there was a burst of discussion in the crowd. Kagura in front also shrank her eyes instantly after hearing the rules clearly. Kagura, who has traveled here for a long time, knows what the forehead protector represents better than anyone else. It is no exaggeration to say that the forehead protector that Genin received from his mentor when he graduated is the second life of the ninja. Don't you see that even those so-called vicious countries are rebelling against each other? When they betrayed the village, they would only get a scratch on their forehead protector at most, but almost no one would discard this accessory that symbolized their ninja status. Speaking of this, I can't help but think of that idiot Sasuke. He should be one of the very few. It can be said that the importance of this forehead protector is far greater than ordinary people imagine. But this time the assessment is, to put it bluntly, they are required to compete with each other for their quotas. This is different from the snatching of the Book of Heaven and the Book of Earth by Naruto and others in the original plot. Even if you give up on that kind of thing, it will not affect the loser's mentality to challenge Chunin again in the future. But if even the forehead protector that symbolizes the status of a ninja is robbed, then the most fundamental pride of being a ninja is basically lost. Therefore, Kagura concluded that there would not be many so-called givers in this assessment. The loser will most likely die. There are also many people on the scene who have figured this out. Within a few minutes, the discussion slowly quieted down. Many candidates spontaneously distanced themselves, vigilantly guarding everyone around them. You must know that the assessment requirements just announced by the examiner did not say that the guardians must come from different villages. Therefore, in this assessment, in addition to people from different villages, even Genin from the same village is his enemy. This is a personal hunting game. Seeing everyone's reactions, the bald examiner also nodded secretly with pleasure. He opened his mouth and said, "There is also another rule. No fighting is allowed within my sight. You must be out of my sight before you can start fighting. Next, you will enter this forest in batches. Come out when you hear my name being called. The first batch is Irakaido, Igawa Shunsuke, Koi Doyuki." As he called his name, a man walked out of the crowd. After about 20 people, the first group of people walked into the forest. Then came the second group, also more than 20 people. Looking at the last group of people, Kagura found that except for Tsunade, Orochimaru, Jiraiya and herself, the 7 ninja swordsmen from Toshiro and Kurigakure village that he had always been optimistic about were actually there. It is obviously not a coincidence that almost the strongest group of people are left at the end. After thinking for a moment, Kagura instantly understood the examiner's intention. In this form of hunting in the forest, those who enter first will undoubtedly have an advantage over those who enter later. After all, the person who gets in first can choose a location that is favorable to them to ambush. Therefore, allowing relatively strong people to enter at the end can be regarded as a balancing method for the examiner in this assessment. 10 minutes after the second group of people entered the forest, following the examiner's eyes, the remaining people also took steps and began to walk into the forest one after another. Just as they entered the forest, the last group of people dispersed warily. Not long after, Kagura and the 4 of them were left in the team. Looking at the empty surroundings, the 4 of them looked at each other and smiled. Kagura said first in a joking tone, "How about the 4 of us team up? Just find a few people to fight 4 to 1, and it feels like we can complete the task directly today." Quote. Faced with Kagura's suggestion, Jiraiya rolled his eyes, and Orochimaru and Tsunade also looked disapproving. Seeing the attitude of his teammates, Kagura also put away his smile and said, "Okay, then let's meet at the finish line tomorrow." Facing Kagura, Orochimaru just nodded and left. Jiraiya put his head behind his hands, smiled at Kagura and said, "How about we compete to see who can reach the finish line faster tomorrow?" Kagura responded with a smile and nodded slightly. Seeing this, Jiraiya said no more, turned around, waved and left. After everyone left, the last Tsunade shyly took Kagura's hand. She stared at Kagura with her big eyes, and whispered in her mouth, "You still have to be careful, although I believe no one here can defeat you head-on. But if others are besieging or ambushing you, you will still be in danger." Quote. Looking at Tsunade's affectionate eyes, Kagura's expression softened a lot unconsciously. He slowly touched her head and responded in a low voice, "I understand, you should also be careful." Looking at Kagura's face so close to her, Tsunade suddenly stood up on her tiptoes and kissed her gently with her red lips. Kagura's eyes widened, but before he could feel the softness, Tsunade left quickly. At this time, Tsunade's face was as red as a ripe apple. She held her face in her hands, leaving only, "I'm leaving," and quickly turned around and ran away as if she had done something wrong. Looking at Tsunade's back, Kagura touched her lips with her hand, as if reminiscing about the kiss just now. However, at this moment, he was vomiting in his heart. I, an adult, had my first kiss taken away by a girl. No, it's only fair that I have to take the initiative next time. Quote. After a few seconds, he suppressed his silly smile, turned around and walked towards the depths of the forest. Admittedly, what he just proposed to everyone was a good strategy. But he also knew very well that these friends in Class 7 would not agree to this strategy. Because they are the legendary Sannin, the geniuses of this generation. Since this is a single-person assessment task, they are not allowed to rely on shortcuts to complete the task. This is their pride, and it is also the belief that a person must have on his way to becoming a strong man. Looking at the dark forest in front of him, a smile slowly appeared on Kagura's face. Come on, let's enjoy this hunting game. In a dark path in the forest, an overly fair-faced boy was walking slowly along it. It was Orochimaru who had just parted with Kagura and the others. Regarding Kagura's joking proposal, he knew very well that neither he nor the other two would accept such an approach. It's just that compared to Jiraiya, he has a relatively dull expression and doesn't know what expression to use to face Kagura's bad taste. So after Kagura said the words, "See you at the end," he directly chose to leave. In fact, after he came to this exam, the only person he could consider a strong enemy was Kagura, who was both a teacher and a friend. Although he was aware of the strength of the Seven or that Tashiro, he did not feel that those people could rival Kagura. As Kagura's teammate, he can be said to have the clearest understanding of its strength. And he has always been very clear in his heart that Kagura has not shown all his strength in front of them, but has hidden something. As a genius of his generation, he also has his own pride. Although he recognized Kagura, it did not mean that he would always admit that his strength was inferior to her. In fact, the current Orochimaru is much stronger than the self at the same time in the original plot. On the one hand, it was because Kagura taught them without reservation. Whether it's taijutsu or ninjutsu, Kagura is happy to share his knowledge with them. Especially regarding the ninjutsu of the Chidori style, he did not hide it, but taught this ninjutsu to 3 people. But it is a pity that Jiraiya seems to be unable to learn it no matter what. The person who learned this ninjutsu the fastest was Tsunade. It's just that she also made certain developments and changes to this ninjutsu. Compared to Chidori's method of concentrated destruction, Tsunade prefers to use Chidori's lightning to stimulate her body, in order to achieve the effect of strengthening one's own strength and defense. On the premise of having natural monster power, after getting the bonus of Chidori style, Tsunade has become a well-deserved humanoid Tyrannosaurus. In the past 2 years, even Kagura didn't dare to compete with her in physical skills. As for Jiraiya, he doesn't even dare to joke casually in front of Tsunade now. As for Orochimaru himself, after studying Chidori-style ninjutsu, his strength has also been strengthened to a certain extent. But compared to Tsunade, he has never been able to fully master this ninjutsu. Maybe I really lack talent for lightning style. Because of this, Orochimaru actually didn't take this test too seriously. To him, except for Kagura and the people in Team 7, everyone else is just cannon fodder. Therefore, he was not on guard at this time and walked on the path openly. His tactics are also very clear. Instead of wasting time looking for prey, it is better to attract prey to come to him. As expected, just when his footsteps landed on a pile of leaves, an accident occurred. With a clear sound, a trap made of rope suddenly appeared under his feet. The noose instantly tightened his ankles and hoisted him to the tree. Faced with this unexpected situation, Orochimaru seems to have made no move to save himself. Just like that, he was hung in the air and swayed back and forth. At this time, a figure came out from behind the shadow of the tree. The visitor is a genin from Kurigakure village. He was wearing a traditional ninja costume, with long pants and long sleeves covering his whole body, and the hood of the jumpsuit even concealed his hair. The only thing that was revealed was his ordinary appearance, but it had to be said that this kind of appearance was the best candidate to be a ninja. Looking at Orochimaru, who was caught in his trap, he showed a trace of disdain on his face and said, "I thought it would be great to be with that legendary monster as a companion. Who would have known that he would be such a half-hearted person, that he was captured without even being able to trigger the trap I set behind him. It's really disappointing." Quote, but before he could sigh, a cold voice came from behind him. "Oh, then can you tell me what other traps you made later?" Hearing this voice, the genin immediately felt a chill on his back and turned around to look over. He saw Orochimaru standing behind him, looking at him with a smile. Seeing such a scene, he immediately looked towards the trap on the other side. But Orochimaru was nowhere to be seen there. There were several snakes as big as arms wrapped around the noose. Looking at the frightened enemy, the smile on Orochimaru's face became even brighter, and he still said in a gentle tone, "Since you are determined to ambush me, you should be prepared for my counterattack, right? With the nature of a ninja, I believe you will not give up handing over your forehead protector." So, at this point, the smile on his face gradually turned into a grin, and there was a dangerous look in his eyes that Kagura and others had never seen before. He seemed to reveal his true nature at this moment, just like a greedy giant snake staring at its prey. After looking up and down at the person in front of him, he continued, "Then you won't have any complaints if I kill you." Looking at Orochimaru, who was slowly approaching him, the genin felt like he was facing a natural enemy. The biological instinct made him feel a kind of fear. At this time, he had lost the idea of resistance, and only had the idea of escape in his mind. Ah! After a brief scream, the forest became quiet again. Orochimaru was rubbing a forehead protector with the Kurigakure village logo in his hand, and there was a drop of blood on it. And that genin fell to the ground covered in blood. His face was pale and his eyes were closed. But the chest that keeps rising and falling shows that the owner of this body is still alive. Looking disdainfully at the enemies on the ground, Orochimaru narrowed his eyes in confusion. What puzzled him was that he didn't kill this man in the end, but subconsciously kept his hand. According to his previous personality, this person should have no chance of surviving. Hey, maybe I have been with Kagura for too long, and he has changed my mentality unknowingly. Thinking of the reason in his heart, he no longer struggled with it, but put away the forehead protector in his hand and headed towards his destination. Not far from him, there was a small flat land in the forest. An examinee from Union Village was pinned to the ground by a huge toad and could not move. Jiraiya jumped off the toad's head and easily took off the examinee's forehead protector in the face of despair. Jiraiya looked at the forehead protector in his hand, smiled and said, "Done." Looking at the subdued candidate in front of him, he hesitated for a moment and then said comfortingly, "Well, you just think it's bad luck to meet me. Try harder next time you take the exam." Quote. After saying that, he looked up at the toad and said, "Tai Wentai, after I leave, please remember to cancel the summons and go back in half an hour. Please help me detain this person for a period of time to prevent him from coming to trouble me again." Quote. Gamabunta took a leisurely puff of cigarette, exhaled a large puff of thick smoke, and then slowly Kaido. "I understand, please leave quickly. Am I still in a hurry to go back to eat? You guy, you don't know how to read the time every time. Psychic beasts also have their own lives, okay." Seeing that Gamabunta showed signs of continuing to complain, Jiraiya shrank his head. He stopped talking nonsense and turned around to leave. So, in the desperate eyes of that genin, his figure gradually disappeared into the dense forest. The scene changed and Tsunade was walking in the forest in a good mood. Occasionally recalling her impulsive kiss just now, her cheeks turned red unconsciously. "Although I have always maintained a relatively close relationship with Kagura over the years, this is indeed my first time kissing. Oh, am I being too proactive? I heard my mother-in-law say that if a girl takes too much initiative, a boy will not understand how to cherish her. But I've already kissed you, so what can I do?" Thinking of this, she unconsciously pouted her lips, looking distressed. After finally worrying for a long time, she calmed down, a dangerous look flashed in her eyes, and said decisively, "Forget it, never mind. Now that he has kissed me, I am his. If Kagura dares not to admit it, I'll beat him." After thinking of the solution, Tsunade finally regained her mood and a smile appeared on her face again. However, just as she pushed aside the tall grass in front of her, several familiar figures suddenly appeared in front of her. Upon closer inspection, there were 7 people standing in front of them, 7 with strange knives. Loquat Juzang knew very well that the 6 people around him could not actually be called his companions. He is a genin who graduated last year. The team mechanism in Kurigakure village is the same as that in other countries. Each team consists of 3 people and is led by a jonin. He was also a genius with outstanding achievements in the ninja academy. From the moment he became genin, he was expected by many people in the village. As for the 2 people he teamed up with, well, what do you say that is? Forget it, the name doesn't matter. The important thing is that those 2 people are not as strong as me in terms of strength or luck. Yes, Loquat Juzo believes in luck. Otherwise, why was he the only one of the 3 who was attacked during the mission half a year ago to survive? Even Jonin, the seemingly tough leader, took the initiative to confront the pursuing enemy in order to stop them. In the end, that person stayed there forever. Only I, carrying the items specified in the mission, returned to the village alone. After experiencing this incident, his strength was recognized by many high-level officials. Yes, in the world of ninjas, missions are far more important than companions. Since those people died, but he was able to successfully return to the village with the mission items, doesn't this just show his strength? It was also from that moment on that he began to have his own understanding of companions in his heart. After completing that mission, he has been waiting for the village to arrange a new team. However, after waiting for a month, one day the newly appointed Mizukage-sama summoned him. When he arrived at Master Mizukage's room, he was instantly attracted by the huge beheading sword in front of him. As a person from Kurigakure village, he certainly knew what it was. It was the broken sword and the beheading sword among the 7 ninja swords. A magical ninja sword that absorbs the iron element in the enemy's blood to regenerate itself and restore the holder's physical strength. When he came back to his senses, he found that besides himself, there were 6 genins of about the same age. In addition to the broken sword and the beheading sword, the legendary 7 ninja swords of Kurigakure village were actually placed in front of them. In fact, these 7 ninja swords were in the hands of the Kingdom of Water a long time ago. The ancestors of the past spent countless time and experience to figure out the specific methods of using these 7 ninja swords. But it wasn't until that day that the masters of these 7 swords truly had their own title, the 7 ninja swordsmen. The first batch of the 7 ninja swordsmen were their genin. Because of the characteristics of each ninjutsu sword, different ninjutsu and taijutsu methods need to be practiced. In theory, these genin, who have not yet developed their own style, are the most suitable owners for them. And they are the candidates carefully selected by Mizukage-sama. In this way, Loquat Juzang joined this 7-person group and started a new ninja life. Fortunately, the other 6 are very similar to him. They are all a group of guys who only believe in their own strength, but it is undeniable that such people are often better at making the right choices in tasks. Unfortunately, the other 6 looked too much like him. Compared to their companions, they trust the knife in their hands more. The only premise for them to form a team is to complete the mission. Just like this Chunin exam, in fact some of them had already seen through the original illusion. But they know very well that the time for assessment is far from coming. Instead of exposing this layer of reality, it's better to take advantage of the chaos and sneak into it yourself. If Mizukage-sama hadn't ordered that all 7 people must pass the exam, the person who first discovered it wouldn't even want to share this information with others. But except for the 7 of them, the trash present was not within their scope of consideration, and they had no obligation to bring these trash through the barrier together. They also saw the dispute between the Yugasa boy and Konoha behind them. But they naturally have no interest in this meaningless provocation. But that young man appeared and defeated the fool from hidden Kurigakure village just by relying on those eyes. If it were not for the face of the village, Loquat Juzang would not even want to show up and let that idiot be eliminated directly. But then they didn't expect that Kagura didn't even think about hiding anything, and broke the illusion directly in front of everyone. Seeing this situation, they could only follow in silently. Another example is now. Unlike Kagura and their so-called pride, these 7 people will only choose the easiest way to get through the level. So as soon as they stepped into the forest, the 7 of them naturally started to form a team. It has to be said that in this environment, they gained a huge advantage by forming a team. In just half an hour, they had already harvested 3 forehead protectors. In fact, if they had not taken into account the attitude of the village and deliberately spared the people from the same village on the road, they would only have more forehead protectors on their hands now. As for those 3 unlucky guys, they can only stay in this forest forever. Whoa! As the feeling of the knife cutting through the body came from the knife, a large amount of blood spattered on the examinee in front of him. He stared at Loquat Juzang unwillingly, and finally his body lost strength and fell to the ground. Putting the huge beheading sword on the ground aside, Loquat Juzang squatted on the ground and took off the forehead protector stained with the blood-stained Konoha mark. It's the 4th one. It seems we can complete the task tonight and reach the final building. The watermelon mountain pufferfish ghost sitting on a stone nearby said. He is a huge fat man with green streaks painted on his cheeks. He has long orange hair that reaches his waist, has sharp teeth, and his neck is wrapped in a fluffy bandage. Loquat Juzang stood up and put away the forehead protector. However, just as he was about to speak, a bush not far from them was pushed aside, revealing the figure of a girl. The person coming was none other than Tsunade. Seeing the appearance of the person coming clearly, Loquat Juzang's brows wrinkled slightly. He remembered that this person was the girl who was with that Konoha monster. He exchanged a vague look with the watermelon mountain pufferfish ghost, and he spoke first. If you retreat now, we can pretend we have never seen you. Yes, Kagura's eyes left a deep impression on them. Anyway, it is very easy to complete this assessment with their strength. In his opinion, there was no need to offend that Uchiha boy for a forehead protector. Tsunade's face became serious when she heard this. She naturally knew that the strength of the 7 people in front of her should not be underestimated. At least Kagura had specifically warned her in advance to pay attention to these people. But when she was about to withdraw, she caught sight of the young man lying on the ground. That young man was the one who had an argument with the Yuli-wearing candidate from Wuin village before. Most importantly, he is also from Konoha. At this moment, the young man who was still full of energy before was now lying in a pool of blood. His eyes were closed tightly, not knowing whether he was alive or dead. The steps that were about to retreat stopped again. After thinking for a few seconds, Tsunade gritted her teeth and said, "Give that man to me, I will take him away." Hearing Tsunade's request, Loquat Juzo was slightly startled. He really didn't expect that this girl would be so ungrateful after his temporary kindness in letting her go. But before he spoke, someone beside him already said, "I said, Loquat Juzang, what are you afraid of? Aren't they the companions of that boy from Konoha? Just kill him, even if we meet him later. Are you still afraid that the 7 of us can't beat him alone?" That's right, and there may not be competitions involving teams in the subsequent assessments. It may be more beneficial to us to kill one of their companions here first. Quote. The 2 people speaking had long, fluffy, spiky hair, a black top and trousers, gray shoes and gloves, and a Kurigakur Anbu mask on their face. A fluffy bandage is wrapped around his neck. He is tall and has slender limbs. The other person has long black hair, vertical braids and a long beard, thick lips and sharp teeth. His left eye was covered with a black cloth, and his head and neck were wrapped in bandages. It was Kushimaru Kuriru and Jinpachi Muri who were known as the Heartless Duo among the 7. Hearing the words of his 2 companions, Loquat Juzang sighed silently. He pulled out the beheading sword beside him, looked at Tsunade and said, "This is your own choice, don't blame me." Seeing the opponent's actions, Tsunade also understood that this battle was inevitable. Yes, she had the chance to retreat directly, but she still made a seemingly stupid choice. But as a descendant of the first-generation Hokage, if she was asked to abandon her companions in Konoha and escape, then she would not be the famous Tsunade Haim. Taking a breath, Tsunade tightened the cuffs on her wrists. He made a ready posture with his hands clenched and his left hand forward. If Loquat Juzo and others had eyes like Kagura at this time, they would have noticed that there was a tiny flash of lightning on Tsunade's body at this time. It is the Chidori style that Tsunade learned from Kagura. It's just that unlike Kagura's fierce attack method, Tsunade's method of use is more meticulous. She spread Chidori's electricity throughout her body, using it to stimulate the muscles throughout her body. As a result, his speed, strength, and resistance ability have been greatly improved. When Kagura saw this method of use for the first time, he first thought of another great comic in his previous life. It was a masterpiece painted by an old thief whose name consisted of 4 words of praise, and Tsunade was very similar to the electric mouse form of one of the protagonists in it. The confrontation in the field became more and more tense, but to everyone's expectation, it was the seemingly weak Tsunade who launched the attack first. She kicked her right foot hard, and a huge crack appeared on the ground. And her body was like a cannonball, rushing towards Loquat Juzang at the front. He looked at Tsunade, who was charging towards him, very domineering. Loquat Juzang did not dare to look down upon him, and quickly raised the sword in his hand in front of him. When a clear crash sounded, in Loquat Juzang's horrified eyes, the sword in his hand was actually smashed by Tsunade to create a huge crack. But before he could think too much, he felt a huge force coming from the handle of the knife. After a brief stagnation, Loquat Juzang's body flew backwards quickly like an arrow off the string. Bang, bang, bang. After knocking down several big trees in succession, Loquat Juzo's figure finally stopped. He barely used the giant knife to support his body, but his face turned pale and he spit out a mouthful of blood on the ground. Seeing that Tsunade's ordinary punch had such power, the others present finally showed serious expressions. They all know the strength of Loquat Juzo, but his physical skills are his advantage, and he was actually knocked away by a girl. Standing on the tree, Kurumi Kushimaru took the lead in launching a counterattack. The ninja sword in his hand is called Nagato and Needle, and it is a long and slender needle-like sword. He flashed in front of Tsunade in an instant. He was as slender as a spider, waving the slender ninja sword and stabbing Tsunade continuously. Obviously Tsunade also knew very well that she could not withstand such an attack with her physical body alone. Thoughts flashed across her mind, and she quickly made dodge movements. However, her opponent's agility was far beyond her expectation. Even though she had retreated early, there were still several blood marks on her body. However, these are not the most dangerous. As Tsunade's eyes flashed, several threads were winding towards her. This is the true face of the long knife and suture needle, the blade that pierces everything and sews it back together. This knife has a long attack range and high lethality. There is a steel wire tied behind the back, which can pull people up. Both the steel wire and the knife are offensive. Seeing that those thin threads were about to wrap around her body, Tsunade clenched her fists and punched the ground hard. Boom! There was another loud noise, and a huge pit appeared between Tsunade and Kurigara Kushimaru. The stones that were knocked away were neatly cut into pieces by those seemingly ordinary silk threads, but they also blocked the progress of those threads. After several steps, Tsunade quickly distanced herself from Kurihara Kushimaru in front of her. However, while she was still panting, a figure appeared above her head. It is the other member of the ruthless duo, Muri Jinpachi. He raised the blasting knife in his hand, Fei-mo, and hit Tsunade's head hard. Why it is said to be smashed is because the explosive knife and droplet are different from the sharp long knife and stitching needle. The shape of this knife is basically equivalent to a large scroll. Looking at the huge blade hitting her, Tsunade did not give in at all, but forcefully waved her fist upwards. Bang! Bang! However, 2 huge explosions appeared in Tsunade's shocked eyes. As soon as her hand touched the explosive knife, Fei-mo, she was blown away by the huge force of the explosion. This is the ability of explosive knife float, a blade that is perfectly combined with explosions. The knife has explosive power, contains countless detonating symbols, and is very lethal. The explosive knife technique throws the explosive scroll of explosive knife droplets around the enemy, causing a large-scale explosion that cannot be escaped. But now as a boy, Muri Jinpachi still cannot control this ninja sword well. Now he can only control 2 explosions at the same time. Tsunade's body flew back uncontrollably, but then her powerful body appeared again. In just a few seconds, she adjusted her posture in midair and landed smoothly on the ground. But the explosion just now obviously caused huge damage to her, and a trace of blood oozed from the corner of her mouth. At this time, a figure wielding a giant knife rushed towards her again. It was Loquat Juzang who had just returned. Looking at the figure wielding a giant sword in front of her, Tsunade barely adjusted her breathing and faced him again. This time her strength was obviously much smaller, and she could only resist the attack, remaining in a stalemate with Loquat Juzang. It was at this moment that two large fish-shaped knives appeared behind her. This time, Tsunade finally couldn't resist. The two knives emit gas from their two circular holes, and then the entire knife glows as a whole. The formed chakra aggregate is like a blue energy ball, and then the chakra light ball bursts out towards Tsunade's back. Tsunade almost completely received all the power of the entire chakra light ball and flew out like a kite with a broken string. It was only then that the main bodies of the two knives were revealed, which were the double knives. This is the weapon of ordinary person, Chojuro in the mobile game. The person holding this weapon is a young man with standing hair, wearing a blue shirt and Madara pants. I checked all the information, and among the first batch of 7 people, this guy has no name. After Tsunade's body flew dozens of meters away, she finally landed heavily on the ground. She lay on her side and spit out several mouthfuls of blood. His trembling hands were on the ground, as if trying to stand up. But after trying several times, there was still no success. Loquat Juzang slowly walked up to her and raised the beheading sword in his hand. There was no pity in his eyes, only indifference. He looked indifferently at Tsunade, who was still trying to stand up, and said, "I admit that you are strong. But that's it." After that, he didn't say any more nonsense and waved the giant knife in his hand vigorously. At this critical moment, a bolt of blue lightning rushed towards Loquat Juzang from the depths of the forest at a speed exceeding the speed of sound. The dazzling blue light made Loquat Juzang tremble. Just when he was stunned for a moment, the seriously injured girl in front of him had disappeared. The blue lightning also stopped, and a familiar figure appeared in front of everyone. He was holding the weak girl with both hands, turning his head back to face them, and a pair of angry Sharingan appeared in front of their eyes. A roar sounded in the silent forest. "How dare you hit my woman?" 15 minutes ago, under a big tree deep in the forest. Standing in front of Kagura was an examinee from Union Village. Just from the appearance, it can be seen that the candidate is in an abnormal state. He stared blankly ahead, and slowly took off the forehead protector on his head with trembling hands. Then, this item that he usually regarded as the most precious was handed to Kagura in front of him like a piece of garbage. The 3 Magatama in Kagura's eyes, standing in front of him, were slowly rotating, and it was obvious that Genjutsu had been activated on them. However, at the last moment when Kagura took over the forehead protector, a look of pain flashed across the examinee's face, and his hands tightened, tightly grasping the corner of the forehead protector. Seeing this situation, Kagura sighed slightly and activated the pair of Sharingan again. After a few seconds, the look of pain on the examinee's face disappeared, replaced by numbness. After completely handing over the forehead protector to Kagura, he closed his eyes, his body went limp and he collapsed on the ground. Now that the goal has been achieved, Kagura doesn't mind giving the other person a sweet dream. In fact, cruelty and kindness are extremely contradictory in him. While on duty, he never shows mercy. No matter what kind of opponent he faces, he can kill him without leaving any consequences. That's because he knew it very well after having read many movies, TV shows and novels in his previous life. The villain dies because he talks too much, and the Holy Mother is eliminated in troubled times. In this environment that has not yet truly achieved peace, if you do not kill the enemy in front of you when performing a mission, the enemy's weapon will pierce your body in the next second. However, Kagura doesn't mind unleashing his kindness when not in combat. When the enemy loses the ability to harm himself, he will always subconsciously leave the other party alive. Kagura knew this very well, but he didn't care. Human nature is not black and white, as long as you follow your heart. Kagura, who successfully completed the task, stood on the crown of a huge tree, squinting his eyes and looking into the distance. He was identifying the direction of the final destination. However, at this time, several loud noises came from the distance. Kagura turned his head and looked over, but only saw some smoke rising from there. Hey, is the battle between Genin so fierce? The distant battle aroused his interest, and he prompted Sharingan to secretly watch the remote live broadcast. But when he saw the blurry figure in the smoke, his heart suddenly jumped. This is the Seven Swordsmen. But before he could think about it, he saw Tsunade being knocked away by the explosion caused by Muri Jinpachi's blasting knife and droplet. Seeing this scene, Kagura felt the blood in her veins go cold. Without thinking much, at this moment he immediately opened the fifth gate in the 8 gates Dunjia, Gate of Limit. During the period of opening Gate of Limit, he will greatly increase his speed, even exceeding the speed of sound. Let me explain here again. The current progress of the protagonist's physical skill attribute is physical skill, Gate 6, Gate of View, with a progress of 67.2%. This means that his body can perfectly control the state of the fifth door. Although the sixth door can also be opened, there will be greater sequelae later. Closing parenthesis. In addition to opening the 8 gates armor, he also used the Chidori style, all in order to make his speed even faster. His body turned into a bolt of lightning and rushed towards Tsunade at great speed. Finally, at the last moment, he rescued Tsunade from Loquat Juzang's sword. Not paying any attention to the enemies of the Seven Swordsmen, Kagura turned her back to them and carefully examined Tsunade in her arms. This was Tsunade in a weak state that he had never seen before, with blood flowing from the corners of his mouth, a painful expression on his face, and his eyes closed tightly. There was a huge wound on the hit part of his back, which was dripping with blood. She reluctantly opened her eyes, and finally relaxed when she saw Kagura's face. "Can you still treat yourself?" Looking at Tsunade, who was still conscious, Kagura asked softly. Seeing Tsunade nod, Kagura breathed a sigh of relief. He gently placed her next to a tree and let her sit on the ground against the trunk. Squatting down, he gently rubbed the top of her head and said, "You don't need to worry about it anymore. Just treat it well. I will solve it soon." At this time, Tsunade no longer had her usual gangster-like temperament. She was just like a weak little girl, nodding obediently and saying, "Yes." Giving Tsunade a smile, Kagura stood up and slowly turned around to face the 7 people. As he turned around, his temperament changed completely. One second he was a gentle boy, and the next second he turned into an angry beast. With his anger, the pair of Sharingan seemed to become brighter red than before, and the slowly rotating Magatama made people fall into it unconsciously. Looking at the eager people in front of him, Kagura no longer suppressed his anger, and a slightly hoarse voice came from his mouth. "You scumbags, how dare you hit my woman?" Kagura, who had his back to Tsunade, didn't pay attention. After he said those words, Tsunade behind him turned red lower half circle. She was not in a hurry for treatment, but held her face in her hands and looked at the back of the boy in front of her with her eyes turning into stars. At this time, Kagura was like the god of war who came out of mythology. The opening of the fifth door made him exude a faint red wave of air. The lightning formed by Chidori was like electric snakes, swimming around his body from time to time. Loquat Juzo, who had been on high alert since Kagura appeared, clenched the sword in his hand. But before he could make a move, a figure suddenly rushed towards Kagura one step ahead of him. It's none other than Kushimaru Kurihara holding a long knife and a sewing needle. He held the sharp long knife in his hand and stabbed Kagura standing in front of him. Looking at Kagura, who seemed to be motionless, a hint of a sinister smile appeared under his mask, just to feel the wonderful touch of the long knife penetrating the flesh. However, the next second, in his shocked eyes, the Kagura in front of him suddenly turned into an afterimage. There was a burst of wind in his ears, and before he knew what happened, he felt like he had been kicked hard. His body was shot away at a faster speed than when it came, like a meteorite falling to the ground quickly, causing a plume of smoke. Seeing this scene, Loquat Juzang, who was standing at the front, swallowed nervously. Kuririka Kushimaru, who was inside, might not know what was going on, but he who had been watching could see it clearly. Facing the Kurisu Kushimaru, who was famous for his agility, Kagura only took a moment to dodge and resist. From the previous investigation of his situation, we only knew that his pupil skills and ninjutsu are very strong, but no one has ever said that this guy's taijutsu is so abnormal. At this time, the rest of the people finally put away their previous leisurely look, and everyone took out their weapons and surrounded Kagura. On the other side, Kagura slowly put away her kicked right foot. Looking at the figure that was knocked away, a trace of disdain flashed in Kagura's heart. "Are you kidding? Comparing speed with lousy who opened the fifth door. If this isn't fast enough for you, I'll quit the ninja industry as soon as possible and find a secluded place to spend my life. Looking up at the crowd of 7 swordsmen gathered around him, a smile appeared on his face. Gently patting the dust on his body, he looked at everyone seriously and said in an extremely arrogant voice. I'm not asking too much, Tsunade probably hasn't completed her mission yet. 7 of you, leave 1 behind, and I will let you go. Quote. Chapter 51. 7 of you, leave 1 behind and I'll let you go. Hearing these extremely arrogant words, everyone felt a trace of anger rising in their hearts. It was clear that his side had the numerical advantage, but it seemed as if they were surrounded by him alone. Seemingly not seeing the anger on everyone's faces, Kagura continued calmly. So, have you decided which one to keep? After hearing Kagura's provocation, which seemed to be truly determined to defeat them, everyone finally couldn't help it anymore. The first to take action were the ruthless duo. I'll keep you. Muli Jinpachi rushed out from the crowd and jumped high into the air. While roaring angrily, he raised the huge explosive knife in his hand, Famo, and smashed it towards Kagura. The arrogant Kagura in front of him just a second ago seemed to be unable to see his attack. Muli Jinpachi was angry in his heart, but his face became even more ferocious. The strength in his hand increased again, and he hit the unsuspecting Kagura hard. Boom! There was a huge explosion, and Kagura's body flew horizontally as if it had been blown away. However, his attacks did not stop. Muli Jinpachi, who had just landed, adjusted his body slightly and rushed towards the direction where Kagura flew out again. He rushed to Kagura's side in midair first, and waved the blasting knife Famo in his hand again. A loud noise sounded again, and Kagura changed her flight direction due to the violent explosion. So in the midst of Murashi Jinpachi's ferocious smile, Kagura was like a ping-pong ball, being knocked away by him. The constant explosions left obvious wounds on Kagura's body, and the scattered flesh and blood made Muli Jinpachi fall into a state of excitement. However, in reality, after Muli Jinpachi shouted that roar, in the surprised eyes of Loquat Juzang and others, they saw that his forward body suddenly stopped halfway. As if possessed by an evil spirit, Muli Jinpachi lowered his hands and stood upright in place. Just looking from the side, you can still clearly see the expression on his face. The expression was constantly changing, from a ferocious smile at the beginning to a heart-rending laughter at the end. Everyone who saw this strange scene felt cold sweat break out on their backs. At this moment, no one needed to remind them, they knew that the companion in front of them was a genjutsu possessed by Kagura. Loquat Juzang took half a step back in fear, but still did not forget to remind him. Don't look him in the eyes. However, his reminder was still a step too late. Although he diverted his gaze from Kagura's face in time, the strange and beautiful pair of Sharingan seemed to be imprinted in his mind and could not be dissipated for a long time. Kagura's slightly teasing voice reached his ears. The voice was so close to him, as if Kagura was whispering something against his ear. Oh, the response is good, but when did you get the illusion that I didn't use genjutsu on you? Facing Kagura's somewhat soft voice, cold sweat started to flow on Loquat Juzang's forehead. He closed his eyes tightly, and his muscles all over his body were tense. The giant decapitating knife in his hand could not give him a sense of security at this time. Everything around him seemed to disappear when he closed his eyes. The breathing of my companions, the rustle of the wind through the woods, the heartbeat of my own body. All these sounds disappeared, and not only the sounds, but also the touch and perception of his skin seemed to have been deprived. It was like he was in an extremely quiet darkness, unable to feel anything but himself. The suppressed emotions gradually took over his brain, and he felt as if he had only spent a few seconds, or as if he had spent a whole day. Just when he couldn't stand the depression and silence anymore, he was about to open his eyes and fight back towards Kagura. All the sensations in his body came back instantly, and he felt like a person who was about to drown in the sea and finally return to the shore. But before he could breathe a sigh of relief, a familiar scream sounded around him. He couldn't care less anymore and quickly opened his eyes and looked in the direction of the sound. But the next second, the scene in front of him made his heart stop for a second. I didn't know when Kagura had arrived among them all, standing in front of the companion holding the two swords in his hands. At this time, he was holding a blue light ball composed of thunder in his right hand, and his entire arm penetrated the chest of the owner of the ninja sword. Blood continued to seep from the penetrated chest, and blood dripped down his arms to the ground. The user of the double sword, Flounder, stared at Kagura in front of him with a look of disbelief. The corners of his mouth moved slightly, as if he wanted to say something. However, in the end, he still didn't have the chance to say it. His eyes gradually became empty, and his body seemed to have been drained of all its strength, and it slowly fell to the ground. Kagura used her left hand to support the man's body, and slowly pulled her right hand out of his chest. Looking at his companion who was standing next to him a second ago, he was lying in a pool of blood in just an instant. Loquat Juzang and others subconsciously wanted to stay away from Kagura in front of them, and their bodies automatically took a few steps back from the bottom of their hearts. Regarding their performance, Kagura looked indifferent. He slowly squatted down, unhooked the forehead protector from the man's neck and put it into his arms. After doing all this, he slowly stood up straight and looked at everyone. He showed a smile and said, Since you refuse, then let me make the choice. Now I have helped you keep one person, or do you want to keep a few more?" Seeing Kagura's dangerous eyes sweeping across all of them, everyone just remained silent, not retreating, but no one dared to step forward easily. The silence didn't last long. Murray Jinpachi, who had been standing there blankly before, suddenly screamed and collapsed on the ground. At this time, the smile on his face was no longer there, but a look of horror as if he had seen something terrible. He sat on the ground, the weapon in his hand fell aside, and he was breathing heavily. Covering his face with his hands, he kept mumbling. Why can't I kill him? He is a monster. Right. He is a monster." Seeing Murray Jinpachi, who had lost his will to fight, the remaining people exchanged glances with each other. In the end, Loquat Juzang cautiously asked Kagura, Are you really willing to let us go?" Faced with his question, Kagura just shrugged Kaido. "I've always considered myself a person of integrity." After hearing Kagura's answer, everyone did not relax immediately. They looked at each other, and finally Kurikuru Kushimaru walked to the collapsed Murray Jinpachi. While helping him pick up the weapons beside him, he carefully helped him stand up. Everyone did not dare to look into Kagura's eyes anymore, but looked cautiously at his feet and slowly backed away. But at this moment, Kagura suddenly said, etc. Upon hearing this, everyone immediately raised their weapons, fearing that Kagura would go back on her word. Kagura didn't care, just pointed the double sword at his feet with his right index finger and said, "Take this knife back. It's too ugly, I don't want it." After saying that, he exerted force on his feet and kicked out the two knives at his feet. Loquat Juzang raised his right hand and caught the weapon steadily. He paused for a moment, and finally said, "Thanks." After saying that, everyone slowly retreated, and their figures gradually disappeared into the dark forest. This is the end of a battle. The newly formed 7 swordsmen. It's time to replace someone. Kagura watched with a smile as the remaining 6 figures slowly disappeared into the forest. After confirming that the 6 people were really far away, he finally breathed a sigh of relief, lifted the 8 gates armor and sat on the ground. Although his physical skills have now grown to the point where he can fully master the opening of the 5th gate of limit, he cannot avoid the normal sequelae. At the same time, he quickly stopped the operation of Sharingan and pressed his eyes with one hand. At this time, he was not as invincible and powerful as he seemed before. Kagura now felt that every muscle in his body was moaning, and the soreness all over his body made him not even want to move a finger. But it's not just the body that's sending out a warning. After overusing Sharingan, the most terrible thing is the throbbing pain in the head. The veins on his forehead popped out, and it felt like the blood vessels there would burst at any time. Seeing Kagura's state, Tsunade not far away didn't care about her injuries and hurried over. She anxiously helped Kagura rub her temples and looked at Kagura with a worried look. After a while, the throbbing pain finally slowly dissipated, and Kagura put down her hand and breathed out gently. Looking up and seeing Tsunade's concerned look, he smiled easily and said, "I'm fine, it's just that Sharingan is a bit overwhelmed. Let's leave quickly. Although the chance is very small, those people might come back. If they do that, we're really going to be in crisis. Quote. Tsunade nodded in agreement upon hearing this, and the two of them stood up while supporting each other. Tsunade hesitated for a moment and then said to Kagura, "Wait for me a moment." After saying that, she limped back. There was a person lying in a pool of blood. He was the Konoha boy who was knocked down by the 7 people in the first place. Tsunade walked up to him and knelt down to examine him carefully. When she heard the other party's weak but still strong beating heartbeat, Tsunade couldn't help but raise the corners of her mouth. Her hand slowly emitted a burst of green light and began to heal the boy's wounds. After just a few minutes, the boy's body no longer had blood flowing out, and he was bandaged with gauze by Tsunade. After rubbing the bag on her waist for a while, Tsunade took out a pill and asked the boy to swallow it. Shortly after swallowing the pill, the boy's breathing became noticeably calmer. At this time, Kagura finally adapted to the soreness in her body and walked towards them. When passing the corpse of one of the 7 people he killed, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. I have to say that these people from the 7 swordsmen are really realistic. In fact, they were able to take away the bodies of their companions just now. But for the 1 in 10,000 possibility, they finally chose to give up the body. After sighing for a while, Kagura helped Tsunade move the boy to a relatively safe tree hole. Finally, they cleaned up the scene a little and left. In fact, even though Kagura seemed to have crushed her opponent in that battle just now. But only Kagura knew in her heart that if she didn't handle it well just now, she might have no choice but to escape with the injured Tsunade. On the one hand, in terms of strength, there is actually not that big a gap between the two sides. In order to rescue Tsunade in time, Kagura used the 8 gates escape technique from the beginning, and was able to rush to the scene from several kilometers away at a speed that exceeded the speed of sound. At that time, he knew very well that he could not maintain the 5th door for as long as he imagined, and a quick victory was the only way. After thinking about it for a short time, he realized that everything happened on purpose. He highlighted his arrogance by leaving one person alone, and then he mobilized Sharingan with all his strength and used Genjutsu to control 7 people at the same time. Then used Chidori to quickly kill one person, thus shocking everyone present. Fortunately, the other party was indeed frightened by his tactics, and finally chose to retreat just like his plan. Otherwise, Kagura will face a tough battle next. You must know that although he is indeed very strong, those opposite him are not ordinary genin. Those are the elites specially selected by Mizukage who are most suitable for using the ninja sword. These people hold those powerful ninja swords, and their true strength may not even be able to defeat ordinary chunin. Coupled with the need to take care of Tsunade who was seriously injured at the side, one can imagine the dilemma Kagura will face. Of course, if they really want to fight, if they decide to use the tailed beast in their body, even though they cannot kill them, Kagura is still confident that they can defeat them. But this involves another factor that Kagura considers, that is, if he really kills all these people, he may have to face the wrath of Mizukage later. These are the elites specially selected by Mizukage, a group of people who were given the first generation of 7 ninja swordsmen. As a result, others had just established themselves, and before they could make a name for themselves, they were wiped out by you alone. I can only imagine how Mizukage would feel. Although after the exam, he didn't need to pay too much attention to this kind of thing. But for him who just wants to grow up, facing a shadow-level hatred is not a good thing after all. This was also the reason why he finally returned the twin swords to them. It's true that I dislike it because it doesn't look good. Thinking of this, Kagura felt tired. If only I were really just a teenager, I wouldn't have to think about these things and just do whatever I want like Naruto. The injured 2 people finally found a hidden hiding spot before nightfall. At this time, Kagura has basically completely gotten rid of the sequelae of 8 Gates Dunjia. Hiding in a relatively narrow cave, he lit a fire. Looking at Tsunade who still looked a little depressed, he said comfortingly. Now that we both have the amount of protection we need for the assessment, we don't have to think about going out to hunt others. Let's have a good rest here tonight. After dawn tomorrow, we can just rush towards the final destination. Quote. Tsunade nodded when she heard this, and then she suddenly blushed as if she thought of something. After squirming slightly for a while, she said in a voice not much louder than a mosquito. I need your help to treat my injuries. As she said that, She took out a bottle of ointment from the bag, and then turned away embarrassedly. As her body turned, her white back appeared in front of Kagura. The last blow from the energy wave of the twin swords, Flounder, hit her back solidly. The clothes here are naturally not like the Hulk's shorts. After receiving such a level of attack, the clothes on Tsunade's back were already damaged. At this time, her jade white back was completely naked in front of Kagura. But Kagura only felt heartache in her eyes, because there was a hideous wound in the middle of her back. Although the blood was no longer bleeding, the outward wound and the coagulated blood scab still made him feel pain. The position of her back made it impossible for Tsunade to use healing techniques on her own, so she had to ask Kagura to help her apply ointment. Taking the bottle of ointment, Kagura carefully applied it on the wound. Ah, woo! But as soon as his hand touched it, Tsunade let out a groan. As if she sensed something was wrong, Tsunade quickly lowered her voice. She closed her lips tightly, looked at Kagura with tears in her eyes, and whimpered muffledly. Kagura, who was a little distracted by Tsunade's moan, swallowed subconsciously. He forcibly kept his hand steady and continued to apply the ointment as if nothing was wrong. Woo-woo. Just like that, with Tsunade murmuring, Kagura finally helped her finish applying the medicine with difficulty. Putting down the ointment on his hand, he breathed out a breath, feeling even more tired than after fighting during the day. Isn't it just a medicine? Do you want to call it like this? Touching the non-existent sweat on his head, he found that Tsunade was still staring at him with an aggrieved look. What's wrong? He asked caringly. Tsunade shrank her body towards him, opened her big eyes and said, I am cold. Forehead. Kagura really ignored this. The forest at night is indeed much colder than imagined. Moreover, the back of Tsunade's shirt was almost completely gone at this time, and she was seriously injured, so it was normal to feel cold. But for a while, he didn't know what to do. He only had one shirt. I do have a vest. But in order to take into account the defense, the vest was not filled with cotton, but with a thin layer of metal. Even if you wear this, you won't feel warm. Just when Kagura was debating whether to take off her only shirt and give it to Tsunade, leaving her naked all night, Tsunade seemed to notice his dilemma and spoke again. Or, will you hold me to sleep tonight? Saying this seemed to have exhausted all her courage. She lowered her head shyly, and Kagura could not see her current expression. Nani. After hearing this, Kagura's face became stiff, and she felt like she couldn't turn her head around for a while. Before he could respond, Tsunade's buzzing voice came again. Always try. After the trial, we will be adults. Quote. Kagura. Hiss. So Tsunade, are you so bold? But I have to say. This is a good idea. The sun reluctantly climbed up from the distant east, and the morning light penetrated through the leafy woods. As a ray of morning light shot into the cave, Tsunade and Kagura finally woke up from their sleep. The two walked out of the cave, and Tsunade stretched herself comfortably. Unlike last night's weakness, Tsunade looked refreshed at this time. On the other hand, Kagura behind her clearly had two dark circles under her eyes, looking depressed. After looking at the direction, Kagura prepared to discuss the way forward with Tsunade. What? You ask me what happened last night? Please ask the student who asked this question to go to the side and face the wall for a while. They are just two minors. Although they are alone in a room, what do you think could happen to them? Although our protagonist Kagura does have some plot ideas, it is obvious that what he and Tsunade have in mind are not the same thing. The whole night last night, he really just hugged Tsunade and slept. So when he woke up in the morning, he finally couldn't suppress the curiosity in his heart and asked Tsunade. Is this what you said you can do to become an adult after trying it? Faced with his question, Tsunade replied matter-of-factly. Yes, Grandma told me. The adults just hug each other and sleep together. Quote. At this moment, Kagura regretted extremely why she had stopped Jiraiya from taking Tsunade to visit his pornographic books. As for why he looks so depressed. Although she is still young, Tsunade is now a solid girl. The soft yet uneven touch kept Kagura from falling asleep for the first half of the night. It was not until the middle of the night that he reluctantly fell asleep. Back to the main text, the two of them identified the direction, and then found a creek to briefly freshen up. During this period, Kagura thought for a while and gave her vest to Tsunade. After all, we can't let her run around in a halter top all the time. Speaking of which, I don't know if it's because she has the blood of the Senju clan, or because her physique is indeed different from ordinary people. After just one night, the hideous wound on her back had scabbed over and was obviously much smaller. Tsunade felt it and couldn't even feel the pain coming from her back. Because Kagura had already determined the direction of the endpoint by standing on a high place yesterday afternoon. So now after the two of them determined their location, they rushed directly towards the endpoint. Along the way, of course they met other people. Some people who consider themselves smart come directly to the path to the destination early in the morning, planning to ambush those who are on their way by setting traps. Of course, even Tsunade can easily see through this simple trap, let alone Kagura. However, even if the two of them avoided all the traps, the ambusher did not dare to show up from the beginning to the end. Logically speaking, it has already reached this point. Even if they know they are losing, the opponent should make a final attempt. After thinking for a while, Kagura also figured out the reason. It seems that the fact that he killed one of the 7 ninja swordsmen yesterday has reached some people's ears through some means. That's why when those people saw themselves in Tsunade, they were so afraid that they didn't even have the courage to take action. They even encountered a battle on the way, and the moment the two people in the battle saw them, they both retreated and ceased fighting in a tacit agreement. Seeing this situation, Kagura, who wanted to watch the excitement, couldn't help but shook her head. It wasn't until they were far away that the two men resumed their duel. So the two of them ran through the clear forest. Under this situation, in just 2 hours, they came to the white building the examiner mentioned. When they arrived, they were not surprised to see many people already sitting in the open space outside the building. As soon as they walked out of the woods, they saw Jiraiya waving to them excitedly, and Orochimaru was sitting next to Jiraiya. Kagura smiled at the two of them and led Tsunade slowly towards them. When they were reunited, before Jiraiya could speak, Orochimaru, who had always been silent, spoke first. He frowned at Tsunade, saw the obviously damaged clothes and asked, "Tsunade, are you injured?" After hearing Orochimaru's question, Jiraiya noticed something strange about Tsunade. He walked around Tsunade with his eyes wide open, and suddenly said angrily, "With your strength, no one here can hurt you like this. Were you ambushed, or were you being beaten?" Hearing the concern from her companions, Tsunade felt as if a warm current flowed through her heart. But she didn't speak in the end, and just shook her head at the two of them to show that she was fine. Seeing this, Jiraiya and Orochimaru looked at Kagura in confusion. Seeing Kagura shaking her head in the same way, the two of them stopped asking any more questions, closed their mouths and sat back on the ground. Kagura was very clear about Tsunade's psychology. She, who has always been proud, was beaten so badly. She would definitely not tell Orochimaru and Jiraiya about this kind of thing. But with her vengeful character, she will definitely find an opportunity to avenge herself. As for the 7 parties involved, oh, no, now they should be called the 6 people. At this time, they had already reached the end point, not far from them. However, when he saw Kagura and the two arriving, except for Muri Jinpachi, there was an obvious look of fear on his face. The rest of the people seemed to have not seen them and remained calm. Kagura and others were naturally not the latest group, and the closed door of the white building in front of them seemed to inform everyone. This door will not be opened until the last moment. Later, several more candidates came one after another. Kagura looked up and looked around. There were only 30 people including herself. He still remembered that when he first entered the forest, there were nearly 80 candidates in total. According to the rules, there should be close to 40 people with a 50% chance. However, considering that some of them were seriously injured after getting forehead protectors, or some people hunted for more forehead protectors in order to eliminate more competitors in advance, then this number of people is quite reasonable. The sun gradually climbed up and reached the highest point in the sky without everyone noticing. While Kagura was still counting the number of people, the closed door in front of her made a heartbreaking creaking sound. Everyone was attracted by the sound of the gate of opening and looked over there. As the door opened, 2 instructors walked out. One is the same bald examiner from Hidden Mist Village, and the other is a new face. This is a Jonin from Cloud Hidden Village. His forehead protector is tied around his neck, and he is also wearing a Jonin-style combat uniform. In huge contrast to the bald examiner next to him, this man has thick and beautiful long hair. And under the long, straight black hair, there is a face that is both beautiful and handsome. If you just looked at the face and hairstyle, Kagura almost thought she was a female examiner. The two walked out of the building side by side and looked up at the crowd. He raised his head and looked at Liang, and the same bald examiner said, "Time up. The time for this test is over. Bring yourselves and the extra forehead protection you obtained and give them to me." Quote. Hearing this, everyone present consciously formed a long queue in front of him. After collecting the forehead protectors handed in by everyone one by one, the examiner looked at the registration booklet in his hand and then announced, "Very good. Here I announce that the number of qualified people for this third round of Chunin exam is 30. Come in with me." Quote. After saying that, the two examiners turned around and walked inside the building. Everyone did not hesitate and followed them directly. After passing a corridor that was not too long, the scenery in front of everyone suddenly opened up. Looking at the scene in front of him, Kagura, who had already predicted it, sighed secretly. It is as expected. Everyone followed the two examiners through the narrow and dark corridor. The crowded space and dim light gradually made people walking feel a depressing atmosphere. Fortunately, this depression did not last long. After only a few minutes, everyone felt their eyes light up, and a huge space appeared in front of them. The first thing that catches the eye is the towering dome and countless spotlights shining with white light. The place where the spotlights shine is a huge arena. The only difference from the arena in everyone's mind is that this is a white circular arena. The radius of the arena is as long as 20 meters, and its huge space can be used by various types of ninjas to challenge. And around the circular arena, there are also circles of circular seats. Looking at the large number of seats, it was not difficult for Kagura to guess that this arena might have held many duels. Looking at the layout in front of her that looked like the ancient Roman Colosseum, Kagura showed an expression that was indeed the case. From the first level of Genjutsu, to the written test and the hunting game in the forest. Although many details deviated slightly from the plot in his memory, the general assessment content did not deviate too much. But if you think about it carefully, for ninjas, the test is nothing more than Genjutsu, intelligence acquisition, ninjutsu application, practical combat skills and team cooperation. Then the Chunin assessment methods of the past dynasties will naturally not change much. The two examiners ignored the surprise of many candidates and walked directly onto the stage in front of them. The long-haired examiner from Union Village stood half back with a smile on his face. The bald examiner from Kurigakure Village, which was still the main venue for this exam, spoke. This is the main venue for your fourth assessment. The rules of this battle are to conduct team battles in the form of small teams. Quote. As soon as the words, team competition, came out, there was an uproar. Hearing this, Kagura was also stunned. He had never thought that this was the fourth game, and that this type of assessment would actually appear. Hearing the noise from everyone in the audience, the bald examiner did not stop it immediately, but let the candidates present discuss it for a while before waving to signal silence. Looking at everyone who gradually became quiet, he spoke again and continued. First you have to form a team. There are 30 people here in total. Every 3 people form a team, making a total of 10 teams. Afterwards, they will fight in teams, 2 teams at a time, for a total of 5 times. There are no requirements to form a team, and there are no restrictions on nationality. In other words, candidates from Kurigakure, Kumogakure and Konoha village can be freely matched. After successfully forming a trio, come over to me to register. Quote. Having said this, he paused for a moment to let everyone digest the information before speaking again. Let me remind you first that team battles are still conducted in a 1v1 format. Anyone who voluntarily admits defeat on the field, loses combat consciousness or combat ability will be judged as a loser. The loser goes off the field, while the winner can stay on the field and continue to the next game. When all 3 members of a certain team lose, the entire team of 3 will be eliminated. Therefore, selecting people to form a team is also a very important strategy. If you can choose extremely strong teammates, you can advance smoothly in a direct 1-on-3 matchup. Quote. When he said this, he glanced at Kagura in front of him intentionally or unintentionally. Following his gaze, everyone present couldn't help but look towards Kagura. Facing everyone's gaze, Kagura shrugged her shoulders without changing her expression, her face still remaining calm. However, in fact, he was constantly complaining about the bald examiner in his heart. Just say it, what do you want me to do? I have to remind everyone to be careful about me or fawn over me, right? Am I such a pushy person? Don't you understand that if you become famous early, you will die soon? Just be patient and grow slowly is the way to go. Just as he was vomiting in his heart, the bald examiner looked at the clock above the entrance to the arena and said, "The team formation time is 15 minutes. After forming the team, give me a team name. If you haven't formed a team after 15 minutes, I will randomly form a team for you. Start now." Quote. As his words fell, the scene immediately erupted like boiling water. "Hey, are you interested in joining us? Join me as a team to ensure you pass the test. Hey, little sister, do you want to come over to our group? Brother promises that we can fight 3 against 2, so you can just lie down. But after it's over, are you interested in going shopping together? Go away. You attacked me just now in the forest outside. Do you think I didn't see your face clearly? Oh, I have never seen such a shameless person." Facing a group of people who were looking for a team, Kagura looked calm and unhurried. He smiled and looked at the 3 Tsunade people behind him and said, "Haha, isn't this God helping me? They didn't expect that our entire team broke into this exam. Compared to others, we don't need to form a team at all. As long as there are 4 of us, At the end, he thought of something and hummed in confusion. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly said, turned to the examiner on the stage and asked, "Did you just say a threesome?" Faced with this nonsense, the examiner looked at him like an idiot Kaido. "Aren't you in Konoha a team of 3? Isn't it common sense to have a group of 3 people? Go ahead, why did you forget this?" Since she has been teaming up with Tsunade and others, Kagura has forgotten that normal teams are composed of 3 people. Class 7 is the only special one just because he joined the class. Looking back at Tsunade, who looked helpless, and Jiraiya, who was holding back a smile, Kagura couldn't help but roll her eyes. Fortunately, there was a more reliable Orochimaru at this time, who asked the most critical question. "So, which one should we give up?" Hearing this question, the 4 of them looked at each other, not knowing how to answer for a while. But problems always have to be solved. After a period of thinking and discussion, they came up with the best solution. That would be to give up on Kagura. In fact, this proposal was first proposed by Kagura herself. The reason is very simple. This is the best way for them all to pass the exam. With the strength of Tsunade and the other 3, even if they faced 7 or 6 people with ninja sword holders, they would have a high chance of passing. As for Kagura, I have to say that the bald examiner was right. Even if he was the only one, it would not be difficult to directly wear 3. Of course, there is also the worst possibility, that is, the 3 Tsunades will face off against Kagura's team. But the chance of this is very small, and even if this happens, Kagura won't care. Whether they were defeated by themselves or said that they quit on their own initiative, the 4 of them would not have any objections. Because they don't care much about the name Chunin, otherwise they wouldn't have missed the Chunin exam for 2 consecutive years. But Kagura also made up his mind, if he really encountered this situation. Although I may feel sorry for my teammates, I will choose to give up directly. After all, for me, I don't have to become a Chunin this year. And if Tsunade and the other 3 upgrade, they will have no worries next year when they are alone. Then for him, becoming a Chunin would be just a matter of easy reach. Watching Tsunade and the other 3 people come on stage to register and report to the examiner, even though it was their own initiative. But Kagura, who was standing in the audience, still felt a bit sour and disappointed. At this moment, a voice came from behind him. "Hey, are you interested in teaming up with me?" Hearing this, Kagura immediately turned his head and looked back. But when he saw the speaker, he was a little surprised. Because the person he invited was somewhat unexpected. "Are you interested in forming a team together?" Hearing the invitation, Kagura turned her head and looked back. But the person inviting him in front of him made him a little surprised. Because he knew this person, and he was one of the few people who could attract his attention among the many candidates in the early stage. This person is Tudai from Union Village. When he first came to the examination room, apart from the 7 people, he was the only one who could bring him a sense of threat. Not to mention the way he looked like the boss of many genin in Union Village at that time. Anyone who is not stupid can know that this person is not simple in strength. This is what surprised Kagura. Logically speaking, this guy should have no shortage of people to team up with. Seeing Kagura's doubtful eyes, Toshiro instantly understood the other person's doubts. I saw a hint of sincerity in his only exposed eyes, and he said with a sincere face. Well, I really don't lack people who can form a team. But I want to choose a team candidate with a higher probability of advancing. At the beginning, I saw you and the 3 people discussing together, so it was not convenient to come and disturb you. But since the 3 of them have already registered, I don't have any scruples about inviting you again. Quote. Hearing this, Kagura was slightly startled. He could feel that what this man said was true, and logically speaking, there was nothing wrong with what he said. It's just that he didn't expect this man to speak so frankly. Seeing that Kagura remained silent, Toshiro's expression did not change at all, but continued to take the initiative. Maybe I speak more directly, but this is my habit and I can't change it. So, what is your answer? As he spoke, he stretched out his right hand towards Kagura. Looking at Toshiro with clear eyes in front of him, Kagura thought for a moment and suddenly smiled. He also stretched out his right hand and shook it. While shaking hands, he responded, "You are very interesting. I don't hate people like you." The scene of the 2 holding hands clasped was naturally visible to everyone else, making everyone tremble in their hearts. Well, this is a strong team they absolutely don't want to encounter. The team-up of Kagura and Toshiro was naturally noticed by the 2 examiners on the stage. The long-haired examiner who had been standing behind finally couldn't help but walked over to the bald examiner. While looking at the candidates below, he asked his doubts in confusion. I really don't understand why you set such a rule this time. Oh, any questions? Hearing his question, the bald examiner turned to look at Kaido. Looking at the candidates who had formed a team and stood aside, the long-haired examiner continued. I can understand that this kind of 1v1 duel can better reveal their strength and character. But don't you think it's a problem that the winner can stay on the court? He turned his head and looked at the bald examiner's face before continuing. In this way, those who are too strong can directly fight against 3. For example, that Kagura. You and I both know very well that even if we are one-on-one with him, we dare not say that we can defeat him with certainty. This kind of existence is simply not on the same level as other candidates. Quote. The bald examiner still had no reaction when he heard this and said calmly. I know, what next? The long-haired examiner was slightly startled and said a little hastily. Then wouldn't it be very likely that the people in his group would go directly to the next round? This is simply unfair to other candidates. Some people simply make choices and are far better than those who work hard. Quote. At this time, a change finally appeared on the face of the bald examiner. He looked at the other party with some disdain and said in a slightly contemptuous tone. Are all the Jonin in Kumogakure village the same as you? It seems that from now on, we in the water country don't need to be afraid of you. Quote. After hearing this, the long-haired examiner's expression changed, his brows furrowed, and he asked dissatisfiedly. What do you mean? Faced with his question, the bald examiner did not answer directly. Instead, he opened Shikai to answer his previous question. You just asked me if that was fair. In my opinion, this is more than fair. As I said, there are no restrictions on forming a team. This also means that everyone has the opportunity to team up with someone like Kagura. You asked me again whether choice is more important or effort is more important. As a person, I would answer you that both are important. But as a ninja, I will tell you that choice is more important. Quote. Having said this, he paused slightly and then continued. On the battlefield, those who make the right choices are most likely to survive. And only those who survive can continue to work hard. This exam not only tests their strength, but also tests their ability to choose. You can put aside your pride and choose a strong person and vassal him to enter the next round. You can also keep your original intention and stick to your own path. But since you have chosen to be the enemy of the strong, don't complain, but do your best to overcome that hurdle. This is the way for ninjas to go. Quote, after hearing these words, the long-haired examiner remained silent. Although he did not completely agree with this view, he did not refute it loudly, but silently retreated to the back again. Off the field, Kagura and Toshiro were worrying about one thing, that is, they still lacked one member. Although Toshiro has many friends from Kumogakure village, similar to Kagura's previous situation, those people can just form a group. In fact, Toshiro and Kagura are both the redundant people. As for Kagura, although there were many people from Konoha present, he was not familiar with these people. In fact, except for his friends in Class 7, he doesn't even know anyone in the Uchiha family. So the two of them were looking at each other face to face, but they didn't know how to get the last person together. Fortunately, at this moment, a soft voice came from behind them. Do you still need to recruit team members? Can I join you? After hearing this, the two people turned their heads and looked at each other. The speaker was a short and thin girl. She wore a Konoha forehead protector on her head, and her short hair was neatly combed into two buns and tied back. Her face is delicate but not very beautiful, and she wears thick black-rimmed glasses. She was wearing a blue short-sleeved tights, but what caught Kagura's attention the most was the logo on the back of the clothes. That is a symbol similar to a cattail leaf fan. It is the symbol of the Uchiha clan. The moment he saw the sign, Kagura's brows jumped, and he asked hesitantly, "Who are you?" Of course the girl in front of her knew that this was the elder brother in the family. She nodded slightly and said Kaido. "Well, my name is Uchiha Shizu." Quiet. Hearing this name, Kagura frowned and tried to think back. But no matter how hard he tried, he really couldn't think of this clansman. "Hey, it seems like I have to take some time to get to know the people in the family when I go back. At least you have to remember the names of those tribesmen." He thought silently in his heart, but there was a look of understanding on his face. He turned to look at Toshiro and asked for his opinion with his eyes. The corners of Toshiro's mouth moved, but in the end he didn't say anything. He frowned and thought for a moment, and finally chose to nod in agreement. Seeing that he had no objection, Kagura said to the tribesmen in front of him, "Well, no problem, then the three of us will form a team. Don't worry, you probably don't need to play." Quote, facing Kagura's words, the Uchiha nodded timidly. That fragile look makes people feel an inexplicable desire for protection. At this time, Kagura, who had successfully formed a team, stopped talking and turned around and walked towards the stage, intending to register with the examiner. However, Kagura turned around and didn't see it. Toshiro behind him looked at Uchiha Shizu with a hint of deep fear. 15 minutes flew by. The actual situation is that only 10 minutes have passed and everyone has already formed a team. Obviously, everyone does not want to leave their destiny to the so-called randomness. The first people to register were not Tsunade and the others from Class 7, but the 6 people. Speaking of which, maybe they have to thank Kagura. Just because Kagura helped them directly reduce one member, with only 6 people, they completed the team allocation in an instant. Since lots will be drawn later to determine the battle list, each team needs to temporarily come up with a team name and inform the examiner. The 6 people were also simple, named Ninja Sword Team 1 and Ninja Sword Team 2 inches respectively. As for Tsunade, they submitted the name Team 7 inches after a short period of thinking. As for Kagura and the others, they finally chose the name Kagura Band. This is really not because Kagura wants to show off herself. He was not good at naming, so he asked for names from the 2 team members from the beginning. However, the other 2 also said that they were not good at this aspect. It only took them 2 minutes to form a team, but in the end they wasted 5 minutes because of this. In the end, Toshiro suggested that it would be better to just use Kagura's name as the team name. Seeing Uchiha Jinghu agreed, Kagura, who had no better suggestions, finally had to adopt this proposal. Seeing the candidates in the audience who had been automatically divided into 10 groups according to the teams, the 2 examiners stopped writing and began to take the next step. They wrote the team names of all the teams on a small piece of paper and threw them into a square box. The box was shaken up and down several times. After it was evenly shaken, the bald examiner put his hand in and groped for a while. Seeing such a simple and flawless lottery method, Kagura's facial muscles in the audience couldn't help but twitch. After a few seconds of groping, the bald examiner finally took out 2 slips of paper. He slowly unfolded the first piece of paper, glanced at it, and then said the name of the first team in a deep voice. The first game will be fought by Class 7 feet. Having said this, he slowly unfolded the second note. His eyes narrowed, but he continued in a calm tone. Fight against the Ninja Sword Team. Upon hearing this result, Tsunade was slightly startled, and then showed a happy expression. She showed a charming smile to the 3 members of the Ninja Sword Team not far away. Just standing aside, Jiraiya and Orochimaru, who knew Tsunade's character well, felt chills all over when they saw that smile. You know, every time Tsunade is about to seriously beat someone, she will smile like this. Looking at the 3 people not far away who still looked calm, they could only mourn for each other for a minute in their hearts. In order not to disturb the ensuing battle, except for the first member of each team to fight, everyone left their place and went to the high platform auditorium at the highest point of the circular auditorium. There is no doubt that the first person sent by Team 7 is Tsunade. In fact, when she expressed that she wanted to be the first to play, the 2 team members did not dare to say a word at all and turned around and left consciously. The Ninja Swordsman team on the opposite side is composed of the familiar, ruthless duo, Muri Jinpachi, Career Kushimaru and Tsukuyama Fuguoni. After a brief discussion, the 3 finally decided that the pufferfish ghost from Ziguashan would fight the first battle. As the other candidates left, only Tsunade, Ziguashan pufferfish ghost and the bald examiner were left on the arena. The long-haired examiner did not go away, but stood in the audience with his arms folded, as if he was ready to take action at any time to prevent accidents from happening. Obviously, they don't want to cause casualties in this assessment. After all, the candidates who can reach this point are considered the future elites of each country. After looking left and right at the 2 dueling candidates, the bald examiner temporarily acted as the referee and said, "This duel has no time limit. After one party is knocked off the ring, one party voluntarily admits defeat, or loses the ability to continue fighting, the winner will be determined. As for how to consider losing the ability to fight, it will be judged by our 2 examiners. Once we announce the result of the duel, you must stop immediately and cannot maliciously kill your opponent." Quote. Seeing that the 2 people in front of him had no objections, he slowly raised his right hand and waved it down hard. "I announce that the first match is Tsunade vs Watermelon Mountain Fuguoni. Start now." After saying that, he jumped to the audience and stood with another examiner. After hearing the starting instructions, the 2 did not immediately attack each other. Looking at the fat man with long orange hair reaching to his waist, Tsunade's eyes flashed with caution. In the previous encounter in the forest, this person never made a move from beginning to end. For Tsunade, she knew very little about this person's abilities. On the contrary, her own abilities were fully revealed in that battle. So from an information point of view, the 2 were in an unfair position before the war started. Kagura, who was watching the fight between the 2 on the high platform, fell into deep thought while looking at the Watermelon Mountain pufferfish ghost with a mouth full of shark teeth. Kagura naturally knew about this person's ability. In fact, this guy is more like Danzo of Kurigakure Village and Anbu who controls Kurigakure Village in the future. If you have to choose a leader among the 7 ninja swordsmen, this guy is undoubtedly the most suitable person. As the first master of the great sword Samahata, he has many similarities in appearance to the later Inakusaki Kisame. Although the plot didn't make it clear, he felt that there was a high chance that the 2 of them might be of the same race. Therefore, there is a high probability that the Watermelon Mountain Puffer Ghost will be able to merge with Samakari and himself to become a fish man when he becomes an adult. However, he is still young and may not be able to master the big sword Samakar to that extent. And this guy is different from his appearance. He is an opponent with deep knowledge and extremely high fighting IQ. Looking at Kagura's solemn look, Toshiro walked up to him and asked, "Which one of them do you think will win?" Hearing this question, Kagura tilted her head and thought for a moment, and finally answered in the affirmative. "My companion must win." Oh, although Toshiro was a little surprised when he heard Kagura's decisive answer, he did not continue to ask. But only Kagura knew clearly that he did not blindly trust his teammates when he said this. Although the watermelon mountain puffer ghost is also a difficult enemy, the current Tsunade is not her original self. Because of Kagura's existence, she is now much stronger than herself in the original world line. In this one-on-one situation, Kagura didn't think there was a chance of her losing. Looking back to the ring, looking at Tsunade who looked wary in front of him, the watermelon Fugu demon directly took out the big sword Samahata from behind and held it tightly in his hand. He looked calm and said to Tsunade, "Aren't you going to attack? Your strength should be in physical skills. Or are you also Grandmaster Ninjutsu?" However, in the face of his provocation, Tsunade still did not attack easily. In fact, her combat IQ is not low, and she naturally understands that when there is asymmetry of information between the enemy and ourselves, she should take a backup approach. Looking at Tsunade who was still motionless in front of him, the watermelon mountain puffer ghost didn't care. He waved the weapon in his hand and spoke again. "In this case, I won't be polite." After saying this, he waved his right hand forcefully, and the sword Shirakusa originally wrapped in a strip of cloth revealed its true face. The strange weapon covered with barbs was like a long snake that came to life. After a brief squirm, it suddenly grew longer and charged towards Tsunade. Although Tsunade had been vigilant, she never expected that the knife had the ability to change its length at will. Facing this unexpected blow, she could only dodge sideways in panic. But even though her reaction speed was not too slow, she was still rubbed by the big knife on her arm. The barbed knife left an obvious scar on her arm. The watermelon mountain pufferfish ghost still stood where he was, with his right hand retracted towards himself, and the long snake-like sword, shark muscle, returned to him like a well-behaved puppy. A burst of blue light flashed from Samahata's body and flowed into his body along the handle. Feeling the vigorous chakra, Zigwashan pufferfish ghost licked his lips with satisfaction. He looked at Tsunade who was covering her arm and said with a ferocious smile, "You taste very good. You taste very good." As soon as these words came out, the whole place fell into silence. After hearing these words, Jiraiya, who was in the audience on the high platform, pressed his forehead helplessly with his hand, as if recalling some unbearable past event. Even Orochimaru, who always showed no emotion or anger, couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. "I have seen people seeking death, but I have never seen anyone so eager to seek death." As expected, Tsunade was slightly startled when she heard these words, and then an uncontrollable anger rose on her face. Although through her own feelings, she already understood that the big sword, Samahata, had the ability to steal chakra from others. The words of the watermelon mountain puffer ghost actually refer to her chakra. But as a girl, when she heard such words, it was like being harassed by a stinky and obscene pervert. Tsunade felt that all the hairs on her body stood up. After a brief period of confusion, there was an uncontrollable anger. Driven by this anger, she clenched her fists tightly, and traces of electric snakes swam around her body. The watermelon mountain pufferfish ghost, who still didn't know what happened, put the big knife on his shoulder and moved his lips slightly, about to say something else. At this time, Tsunade in front of him suddenly turned into a shadow, and there was a spider web-like crack on the ground where she was standing. Tsunade's figure came to him faster than the whistling sound in the air. At this time, she had jumped into the air, clenched her right hand into a fist and pulled it behind her. She waved a seemingly small but actually powerful fist towards him. Seeing the fist that suddenly flashed in front of him, the watermelon mountain puffer ghost, who already knew Tsunade's strength, did not dare to underestimate it in the slightest. He quickly raised the Samahata on his hand to block it in front of him. Dang! A sound like a metal collision resounded throughout the audience, and the watermelon mountain pufferfish ghost felt a huge force coming from the same shark muscle in his hand. Only then did he understand what Loquat Juzo felt yesterday. His fat body was affected by the huge force and flew backwards uncontrollably. In order to avoid flying out of the ring, Zigwashan pufferfish, who was feeling unhappy, suddenly thrust the big knife in his hand into the ground when he was flying in midair. The same shark's muscle penetrated hard into the ground. Fortunately, the barbs all over the body provided good friction. However, even so, he was pushed for more than 10 meters before he stopped. A straight pit of more than 10 meters appeared on the ground in front of him. But before he could stand still, a sound broke through the air, and the petite figure appeared on his side again. Tsunade still threw out a simple straight punch, but in the face of this simple blow, the Watermelon Mountain Puffer Demon could only helplessly raise his weapon to block. In the ring, Tsunade seemed to transform into a violent berserker, constantly attacking the Watermelon Mountain Puffer ghost. Her body turned into black shadows, and she could only be seen clearly at the moment when she launched an attack on the enemy. But the huge Watermelon Mountain Pufferfish ghost seemed helpless and could only passively raise the weapon in his hand to resist. Seeing this kind of fighting situation, everyone in the stands looked surprised. Hiss, this girl is so strong. No, is this the strength of the legendary 7 ninja swordsman? Why do you just keep getting beaten passively? I wonder if your information is lagging behind a bit. There is no longer a crowd of 7, only a crowd of 6. Right, that's it. Come on Tsunade, hit it hard. The last shout came from Jiraiya's mouth. Looking at the fat man below who was being beaten continuously, he seemed to remember something, waved his hands and roared, his face flushed with excitement. Kagura on the side looked calm, as if this situation had been expected by him. Just looking at the battle situation in front of him, the Uchiha who was originally behind him quietly leaned behind him. She covered her mouth with both hands, looking surprised, and said, Tsunade's sister is so amazing. As expected of a descendant of the Senju family. However, when she approached, Toshiro, who was also on one side, immediately took a few steps back to the other side, keeping his distance from her, as if he was deeply afraid of her. This scene naturally did not escape Kagura's attention. He frowned and looked at the two of them with slight doubts. His lips moved slightly, but in the end no sound came out. Just because of this episode, he became slightly wary of that tribesman, and turned slightly sideways to keep a distance from her. As for Uchiha Shizuo, he continued to watch the battle below as if he hadn't noticed anything. Facing Tsunade's continuous attacks, the Watermelon Mountain Puffer ghost felt depressed. Even if this woman is faster than me, she is still so strong. He simply didn't dare to use his body to receive the opponent's punch. Otherwise, as long as he is given a chance to breathe, he can reverse this situation. But Tsunade's uninterrupted attacks prevented him from finding any chance, and gradually, he discovered a new crisis. Unconsciously, under Tsunade's attack, he began to slowly move away from the center of the ring and had reached the edge. If he doesn't think of a way, he will be knocked out of the ring by Tsunade next time and will be declared defeated. Also aware of this was Tsunade, who was in midair. Looking at the fat figure standing at the edge of the ring, she clenched her fists tighter. The next blow will determine the outcome. A trace of confidence that she would win flashed in her eyes, and all the chakra in her body was concentrated on her right hand, already using all her strength. However, just when she was about to rush towards the opponent, she saw an unexpected scene. I saw the Watermelon Mountain Pufferfish ghost inserting his weapon by his side and making a simple seal in his hand. The bright orange hair behind him suddenly grew longer. The long hair tightly wrapped his whole body, and then the hairs hardened, wrapping him into a hedgehog. Seeing this scene, Jiraiya on the stage was also stunned. Isn't this the same as his ninjutsu? Tsunade, who was also familiar with this ninja technique, was also stunned, but then a smile appeared on her face. She didn't change the direction of her forward movement, and just rushed towards the orange ball of hair. As she expected, the hairs, which were as hard as long needles, were suddenly shot towards her like spikes. Being well prepared, she dodged several times and dodged most of the attacks. Even if there were a few strands of hair, they just brushed past her and scratched her clothes. These dodges did not affect her forward speed. The next second, she was in front of the orange hair. Looking at the hard long thorns covered on it, Tsunade punched straight without fear. The small fist hit the hard shell hard with the sound of breaking through the air. Those spikes instantly pierced Tsunade's fist, but they could not stop the progress of the fist. With a burst of shattering sound, she directly smashed a big hole in the round shell. In the surprised eyes of the Watermelon Mountain Puffer ghost, a straight fist stained with blood suddenly appeared in front of him. Before he could react, the straight punch hit his fat face hard, and his body turned into a black shadow and flew backwards like a cannonball. Boom! The body of the Watermelon Mountain Pufferfish ghost directly crossed the distance between the ring and the auditorium, and was smashed into the auditorium halfway up the mountain. As the dust and stones scattered, his embarrassed figure gradually appeared in front of everyone. Seeing this situation, the bald examiner immediately flashed in front of Tsunade and announced. Tsunade wins this match. Tsunade, who had no intention of continuing to pursue the pursuit, didn't care when she saw this. She raised her right hand and turned to look at the audience on the high platform. He raised his head high, looked at the two remaining opponents, and asked loudly. Who is the next? Who is the next? As Tsunade's slightly provocative question fell, the entire audience fell silent. This result is actually beyond most people's expectations. In terms of appearance, the huge Tsukuyama pufferfish holding the sword Samahata is much stronger than the petite Tsunade. In terms of reputation, because Kagura's monster reputation is too loud, this has also led to the fact that the three people with him have not been famous until now. Compared with the famous 7 ninja swordsmen, Tsunade's current reputation is not worth mentioning. However, it was such a seemingly ordinary girl who finally knocked down the watermelon mountain pufferfish ghost so neatly. Everyone was unable to accept this reality for a while. The Zigwashan pufferfish ghost who was smashed into the auditorium seat pushed away the gravel in front of him with his hands and slowly walked out of the small pit. His face was still calm, and he did not show a trace of unwillingness or loneliness because of being defeated. He patted the dust on his body, then walked back to the stage calmly, and pulled out the big sword shark that was stuck on the ground. Looking at Tsunade, who raised her head high in front of him, he said, I admit that you are very strong, and I hope I can have the opportunity to compete with you again in the future. After saying that, he turned around and walked out of the ring without waiting for Tsunade to respond. Looking at the calm face of the watermelon mountain puffer ghost, Kagura couldn't help but think more highly of this person. In the face of failure, but still able to maintain a stable mentality, such people are the most terrifying enemies. He knew very well that the fact that Tsunade was able to defeat her opponent so easily this time was actually the result of occupying all kinds of favorable circumstances. First of all, if this was not an arena match, with the rule that the one who falls behind loses, this battle would never have concluded so quickly. Although Tsunade relied on her speed and strength, she suppressed her opponent from the beginning. But she actually couldn't completely break through the defense of the watermelon mountain puffer ghost. If the venue were changed, this battle might become a protracted battle. In the end, even if Tsunade wants to win, she has to pay a certain price. But it's useless to say anything. What this world values is the results. The bald examiner looked at Tsunade, then looked up at the audience on the high platform before speaking. Please invite the next contestant to the stage. The remaining, heartless duo, looked at each other, and finally Murray Jinpachi took a step forward. He held the railing of the high platform with one hand, turned over and stood up. Then he used his strength to jump off the high platform and stood firmly on the ring. Compared with yesterday, his face was much paler. In fact, in yesterday's battle, he was the only one who really used genjutsu with Kagura's full strength. After all, even the current Kagura's chakra cannot support him in pulling 7 people into deep genjutsu at the same time. So in the end Murray Jinpachi became the only lucky one. In that illusion, at first he was still enjoying the pleasure of constantly hitting Kagura. But later he discovered that no matter how he attacked, the enemy in front of him could not be knocked down. Those explosions had already blown the Kagura in front of him into a bloody humanoid piece of flesh. But that puddle of flesh and blood that could be used to make dumpling fillings, when he stood up under his attacks again and again, he finally felt a trace of panic. Finally, when he struck with all his strength, an explosion exceeded the limit. The pile of blood clots actually stood up on its peristaltic muscles and smiled at itself. At that moment, he finally collapsed. So although he didn't appear to be injured on the surface, he was actually the one who suffered the most psychological damage. To this day, he doesn't dare to look at Kagura. Looking at the pale opponent in front of her, Tsunade understood something in her heart. After all, as one of the people who is most familiar with Kagura, she has absolute trust in Kagura's genjutsu. Murray Jinpachi, who stood opposite Tsunade, had long black hair with vertical braids, thick lips and sharp teeth. His left eye was covered with a black cloth, and his head and neck were wrapped in bandages. As for the huge blasting sword Feimo he carried on his back, Tsunade had already seen its power in yesterday's battle. Seeing the enemy in front of her who had wounded her without any provocation, Tsunade's eyes already had a fighting spirit. As the bald examiner announced the start of the battle, the two figures disappeared instantly. Boom! When the two figures appeared again, they were already facing each other. Muri Jinpachi had already pulled out the explosive sword Momo from behind and held it in front of her. Tsunade on the opposite side still relied on her pair of iron fists to strike straight forward without fear. However, before the two of them faced each other for a few seconds, the blasting sword in Muri Jinpachi's hand suddenly flashed a gleam of light. Tsunade, who had already had some knowledge of this ninja sword, narrowed her eyes, moved her steps slightly, withdrew her fists, and immediately chose to retreat and dodge. Sure enough, as soon as Tsunade left the place, the ninja sword suddenly emitted a burst of bright light. Bang! Just as everyone on the high platform narrowed their eyes due to the dazzling light, a violent spherical explosion unfolded on the ring. Fortunately, Tsunade, who had evaded in advance, escaped the explosion range in time. The explosion caused a dust mist on the stage, but just as Tsunade narrowed her eyes, a figure rushed out of the dust mist. It was none other than Washi Jinpachi holding the explosive sword Momo high. He waved the huge weapon in his hand and slashed down where Tsunade was standing. Faced with such a situation, Tsunade did not choose to step forward to resist as before, but chose to continue to retreat and dodge. Facts have proved that her choice was right. The huge scroll-like weapon hit the ground, causing another huge explosion. The next battle turned into a chase, but the difference from the previous one was that the roles of the chase were reversed this time. Tsunade was like an agile rabbit, constantly dodging and moving around the ring. Behind her, Muri Jinpachi held his weapon high, chasing her like a hungry wolf. Every time Muri Jinpachi swings his weapon, a violent explosion will occur. Seeing the battle with such explosive sound and shadow effects, the candidates on the stage started talking excitedly. You are worthy of the title given to you by Mizukage-sama. The attack power of that ninja sword is terrifying. Well, you are right. It seems that the girl from Konoha is in trouble this time and may lose. Hehe, you were so loud before, so you must have encountered a tough situation this time. Haha, that's not what you said before. When she knocked her opponent away just now, who said it was lucky that the one she was fighting against was not you? What do you know? This is called this moment, and mine is a timely analysis strategy. How can a stupid young man like you be unable to walk when you see a woman? What do you mean? Do you think we can go down and compete later? Just go. Anyone who doesn't go is a fool. Compared to the noise over there, Kagura still looked relaxed and content. Looking at the calm Kagura, Toshiro couldn't help but said, "Do you think she can win this time? The battle situation looks very bad now. If this continues, it would be great if she can be defeated with minor injuries in the end." Quote. Faced with Toshiro's question, Kagura still answered confidently, "Don't worry, she is stronger than you think." Bang, bang, bang. There were endless explosions, and as the two men chased each other, countless potholes appeared on the ring. Tsunade seemed to be being chased, but there was no trace of panic in her eyes. While she seemed to have narrowly avoided every attack, she was actually observing her opponent's attack methods and power. After cleverly dodging another attack, she suddenly changed the direction of her body. Instead of escaping, she turned around and faced her opponent head-on. Looking at Tsunade, who finally faced him directly for the first time since the battle, Muri Jinpachi had a doubt in his heart. But he didn't think much. He still raised the weapon in his hand and waved it towards Tsunade in front of him. Just when the two figures were about to meet, Tsunade suddenly clenched her hands and hit the ground hard. The effect of her attack was even more powerful than Muri Jinpachi's previous explosion. With a loud noise, the entire venue was enveloped in a burst of smoke. Muri Jinpachi, whose vision was suddenly obscured by dust, did not panic. He immediately stopped and stood there vigilantly sensing his surroundings. Sure enough, there was suddenly an inaudible sound of breaking through the air from his side, and a black figure rushed towards him. But all of this was as Muri Jinpachi had expected. He held the explosive sword Momo in his hand tightly and swung it towards the black shadow. At the same time, he directly activated the explosive talisman above, and two rays of light lit up on the huge scroll. Bang, bang, 2 explosions sounded at the same time in no particular order, and with the burst of light, a violent explosion followed. The strong wind caused by the explosion instantly dispersed the gray fog that filled the entire arena. However, when the gray fog dissipated, the scene in front of him surprised Muri Jinpachi, and he felt his whole body stiffen. The gray fog dissipated, and when he saw the object he hit, Muri Jinpachi felt his blood run cold. Because what he hit was not Tsunade as expected, just a huge stone. Just when he secretly thought something was wrong and wanted to pull away and look back, a delicate little hand, like a scalpel, penetrated his left shoulder without any hindrance. After feeling the pain in the stabbed shoulder, a unique feeling of numbness followed. The numbness quickly spread down his shoulders and throughout his body. Plop! Feeling that his muscles were weak, he could no longer support his body and fell to his knees directly on the ground. He struggled to tilt his head with all his strength, and looked to his left rear with difficulty. The first thing that caught his eye was Tsunade's pretty face. At this time, her right hand was in the shape of a knife, stabbing into his left shoulder like a real sharp knife. A translucent chakra can be vaguely seen around the hand knife, with some subtle blue electric light flashing in it. This is exactly Tsunade's new ninjutsu after fusing the chakra scalpel and Chidori. Use the scalpel to easily cut the enemy's flesh, and then use the subtle control of Chidori to inject electricity into the enemy's body, causing a paralysis effect. Perhaps it was because of Tsunade's talent as a healer. Compared to Chidori's own powerful attack method, Tsunade is more comfortable with this kind of subtle control. At this time, Muri Jinpachi was controlled and unable to move because of this new type of ninjutsu. Looking at the enemy with a hint of fear in his eyes, Tsunade made a fist with her left hand and shook it in front of him. He showed a sweet smile to Muri Jinpachi and said the words that frightened him in the gentlest tone. "If you don't surrender, I'm going to blow your head off." Muri Jinpachi's mouth twitched slightly, but it didn't take him a second to make the right choice. I admit defeat." Hearing this sentence, the 2 examiners in the audience nodded slightly, and instantly came to the stage and came to the 2 people. Tsunade had no intention of adding insult to injury. She took the initiative to withdraw her right hand from the opponent's body and took 2 steps back to show her attitude. The long-haired examiner took a closer look at Muri Jinpachi's injuries and nodded to the other examiner, indicating that it was nothing serious. Seeing this, the bald examiner secretly breathed a sigh of relief. After all, this is the future of their village, and it is impossible to say that there is no selfishness at all. Although I will not interfere with the progress of the game, I will try my best to ensure the safety of these people. Looking at Muri Jinpachi, who silently retreated from the ring, he took a breath and announced. Second match, Tsunade wins. Seeing the girl off the field once again defeating the ace of Kurigakure village, everyone on the stage couldn't help but take a breath. However, as the winner, Tsunade didn't look so excited. She was panting slightly at this time, bowing her body slightly, standing on the stage with her hands on her knees, looking exhausted. Originally, she was seriously injured in yesterday's battle, and her body is not in the best condition today. After experiencing 2 battles at this time, she felt that her physical strength was approaching its limit. Seeing her appearance, the long-haired examiner walked up to her and asked caringly, "Do you want another fight? Or should I replace him with someone else?" Tsunade pursed her lips after hearing this. Just when she was about to continue insisting, a voice suddenly came from the stage. "Examiner, I will appear next in our group." Tsunade stepped back. Quote. Tsunade looked up and saw that it was Orochimaru from Class 7 who was speaking. She was about to retort, but Orochimaru shook his head slightly at her and said, "Tsunade, it's okay, you have proven yourself. It would be foolish to persist any longer." Quote. Tsunade did not refute, but frowned unwillingly, and then walked off the ring obediently. Seeing this, the bald examiner nodded and then added, "A player who actively asks to leave the game after such a victory will be deemed to have been eliminated on his own initiative and will not be able to play again in the future." After a pause, he looked at the people on the high platform and continued. "The next match will be between Orochimaru and Kurisara Kushimaru. But before that, please wait." Quote. After saying that, he suddenly formed a seal with his hands and slapped them on the ground. I saw that the arena, which was originally damaged in the previous 2 duels and was full of pits, instantly returned to its original state after a surge on the ground. Seeing this scene, Kagura couldn't help but sigh in his heart. I have to say that apart from the wood style, which can only be used by Senju Hashirama and Yamato, the earth style is the best. If this kind of talent gets a job at Blue Star, I don't know how high a salary he can get in a real estate company. Not knowing what Kagura was thinking while standing on the high platform, the bald examiner on the field took a break and said, "Invite the next 2 duelists to the stage." As soon as he finished speaking, the 2 figures easily fell from the stands to the new arena. Looking at the 2 candidates in place, the bald examiner waved his right hand to signal that the duel had officially begun. Kurihara Kushimaru had already taken out his long knife and needle. He leaned down, touched the ground lightly with his left hand, and held the long knife behind him in his right hand. With his slender limbs, he looks like a mantis waiting to attack from a distance. On the other hand, Orochimaru still stood with his hands hanging on his sides, seemingly casually. As for the long knife and needle, Tsunade had just briefly described its characteristics to him, but Orochimaru didn't seem to care too much. Seeing his opponent's relaxed look, Kurumi Kushimaru showed a hint of anger under his mask. Chirp! As a faint sound of breaking wind sounded, his body turned into a shadow, and he quickly ran towards Orochimaru. But facing the opponent's surprise attack, Orochimaru seemed to have no precautions and still stood there. Seeing Orochimaru's reaction, Kuramaru Kushimaru had a flash of doubt in his heart, but then he made a decision. The figure flickered slightly, and he who was originally charging straight towards Orochimaru suddenly changed his direction. Countless phantoms flashed around Orochimaru, which were the afterimages of Kurihara Kushimaru moving around him at high speed. Suddenly, as his figure appeared behind Orochimaru, the countless phantoms disappeared. I saw Kurika Kushimaru holding up the long sword with his right hand, and holding a thin silk thread on the handle of the sword with his left hand. He held the silk thread tightly with his left hand and pulled hard. The countless silk threads that originally surrounded Orochimaru suddenly shrank, binding him tightly. Orochimaru, who was bound by countless threads, showed no fear on his face. He stretched out his head to look at the threads on his body and said thoughtfully, "Is this the specialty of your ninja sword? Well, with your agility and physical skills and the special shape of that sword, I probably understand your attack style." Quote, seeing his opponent who was controlled by him but still didn't care, Kurikaru Kushimaru couldn't help but feel a little angry. "Humph, you pretentious guy." As he spoke, he exerted force and began to tighten the threads. Although the threads attached to the long knife and sewing needle seemed small, in fact, he had done experiments and found that even hard stones could be easily cut. As those threads gradually tightened, he revealed a bloodthirsty smile under the mask. Watching the enemy being cut into pieces by those threads and blood flying everywhere was one of his favorite scenes. But as he slowly exerted force in his hand, he suddenly felt his hand loosen. He saw the Orochimaru in front of him suddenly split into countless small snakes. The small snakes surged and easily got rid of their bonds. Seeing this scene, everyone on the high platform frowned unconsciously. Especially those girls, who looked away in horror. There is no way, even Kagura is still not used to this kind of move, let alone other people. Seeing this situation, Kurumi Kushimaru, who was on the field, suddenly felt something bad. But before his body could react, a long figure suddenly appeared from the shadow behind him. Orochimaru's body wrapped around him in an extremely twisted posture. His neck was directly stretched to half a meter in length, allowing his head to move from behind the enemy to the front, staring directly at Kurikaru Kushimaru's masked face. A gloomy smile appeared on Orochimaru's face. Looking at the slightly frightened eyes of his opponent under the mask, he said in a slightly hoarse voice, "So, you like to play with bondage?" When Orochimaru entangles his opponent, the outcome has already been decided. Tangled as if by a giant python, Orochimaru only exerted a slight amount of force, and Kurikaru Kushimaru had already lost his ability to fight. As the referee declared Orochimaru the winner, Class 7 qualified for the first group. It's just that unlike the previous praises and whispers when Tsunade won the victory, there was a dead silence in the stands at this time. Everyone looked like they had seen a ghost. No way, the little snake still crawling around the ring and Orochimaru's twisted figure really made everyone feel like they were watching a horror movie. Especially the stooped back of Kushimaru Kurihara after his defeat. Even through a layer of mask, everyone seemed to be able to see the desperate expression on his face. After all, no matter who is surrounded by the enemy's body like this, he still looks at the enemy stretching his neck and asks face to face, "Do you like bondage?" It is estimated that they will not be in a good mood. Compared with physical injuries, this kind of psychological shadow will probably take more time to recover. As Orochimaru slowly walked back to the stands, everyone along the road subconsciously made way for him. It is estimated that after this scene, Orochimaru's name will be spread in the villages of the other two countries. Well, it's just that the reputation may not be very good. In the stands, only Kagura Jiraiya and others greeted him without any care. Jiraiya held his head behind his hands, curled his lips and said dissatisfied, "Tisk, you are so smart, why didn't I think of asking for help just now? This time I was promoted without playing a single game, which made me feel like I was holding my back." Quote. Faced with Jiraiya's complaints, Orochimaru didn't say anything, just stood there and looked at him with a smile. Looking at the polite young man in front of him, Toshiro who was beside Kagura couldn't connect him with the pervert in the ring before. No matter how much Jiraiya complained, the result of their promotion would not change in any way. The on-site draw continues. As the square box appeared again, the two teams drawn by the examiner this time were the second ninja sword team and the Konoha fighting team. Needless to say, the second ninja sword team, the Konoha struggle team, can know the origins of its members just by hearing their names. Although the bald examiner said there were no restrictions on team formation. But in fact, the candidates present still form teams according to the affiliation of each country as the first factor in team formation. In fact, among the 10 teams present, except for Kagura's team, the members of the other 9 teams are all from the same country. And this showdown is between the 3 ninja swordsmen from Kurigakure village and the genin from Konoha. As for the process of this duel, it can only be described as one-sided. I don't know if it's because I was beaten by Tsunade and Kagura and I need to vent my temper. Or maybe the continuous failures gave these people who were hailed as geniuses in the village a sense of urgency. Loquat Juzang, who was the first to appear, directly showed everyone the drama of one wearing 3 at a time. Although in Kagura's eyes, this person's strength seems to be relatively ordinary. But if compared among genin, Loquat Juzo is among the top people in both taijutsu and ninjutsu. Compared with the other 6 ninja swords, the ability of the broken sword and the beheading sword can be said to be the most common one. In addition to being sharp and self-repairing, this knife does not bring much enhancement to its owner's strength. But because of this, Juzang Loquat, who holds the broken sword and the beheading sword, actually has the best strength among the 7. It was this duel that made everyone else feel the difference between the 7 genin who possess the ninja sword and the ordinary genin. At the same time, they also realized the strength of Tsunade and Orochimaru who had been able to defeat these ninja swordsmen before. These people are not on the same level as these genins. After Loquat Juzang contributed a wonderful duel for everyone, the next 2 group duels seemed a bit ordinary. Perhaps it was a coincidence that the next 2 group duels were between the group from Kurigakure village and the group from Union village. In the first group showdown, due to their similar strengths, they had to fight for 5 games before deciding the winner. 3 members of both teams came off the field to participate in the battle. All members left without regrets after exhausting everything they had. Although these 5 battles were not outstanding in terms of strength, Kagura and others still watched with gusto. After all, compared to a pure duel of strength, this kind of spirit of doing everything in order to win can resonate more with people. In the end, the team from Union Village was superior and won the final victory. After hearing the announcement of victory, the 3 people who had obviously formed a temporary team hugged each other tightly and cried bitterly on the stage. The people in the stands watching that scene couldn't help but applaud them. The next group showdown is still between Kurigakure and Union Village. But this time, the accident finally happened. In the second individual battle, the candidate from Union Village failed to escape the enemy's attack in time and was cut off by a short sword. Fortunately, the examiner came to the stage in time and the man's life was not in danger. However, the broken arms on the ground also destined that candidate's ninja career to end here. Regarding this result, Toshiro, who was also from Union Village, stood next to Kagura. Although his face was angry, he did not make any unnecessary moves in the end. After all, he knew very well that the existence of those examiners only ensured that the candidates would not lose their lives in the arena. As for the battle between genin, due to the weak abilities of both sides, it is more likely to be unable to withdraw their strength. For that kind of attack, even if the examiners expected it, they could not stop it on stage. After all, if you rush onto the stage to interfere in the game just to avoid injury, then the significance of this exam will no longer exist. But he knew it in his heart, but seeing his companion injured like that still made his mood fluctuate a little. At least Kagura on the side could clearly see that the veins on his hand holding the railing of the stand were prominent, and Kagura was even a little worried whether the small railing would be broken by him. This accident also ignited the emotions of both sides. In the next few battles, it can be clearly seen that the movements of both sides have become larger, and the number of injuries has also increased significantly. But fortunately, something like a broken arm did not happen. This time the two sides also fought fiercely for 5 games before deciding the winner. In the end, Kurigakure was stronger and won the final victory. Seeing this result, the bald examiner in the audience who also came from Kurigakure village couldn't help but smile. Although he strictly abides by the referee's duties here, he definitely still hopes that people in his village can have more qualifications. Especially after the 7 people who were given high hopes by the village failed one after another, this unexpected group should also give Mizukage-sama some comfort. The previous 8 groups of battles are over, and naturally there is no need to draw lots for the remaining 2 groups of duels. Or maybe it was fate. The opponent Kagura and his team faced was a group all from Konoha. Without consulting the 2 temporary players around him, Kagura turned over and jumped onto the ring. He looked up at the 3 people who were also from Konoha and said, "I'm the first to appear here. For the sake of fairness, do you want to consider joining the 3 together? I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more."